Hello everyone, tonight we are standing in the skeletal remains of a great city sometime in the late spring of 1945. Imagine you're in Berlin, the air thick with the ghosts of artillery, and the fine gritty dust of pulverized concrete carries the metallic tang of a world torn apart. The Grand War, the one with front lines and roaring tanks, has just shuddered to a halt. But beneath the surface, under the watchful eyes of weary soldiers from 4 different nations, a new kind of conflict is being born. It's a war of whispers, of furtive meetings in bombed-out cafes, of secrets traded like currency. This is the world you've just been dropped into, and let's be very clear, if you were a real person here, not a general, not a spy, just an ordinary citizen who knew a little too much or too little, you probably won't survive this. You are a resource or an obstacle. Nothing more. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. In the comments below, I'd love to see where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. Your boots crunch on a thin layer of shattered glass that seems to cover every surface, a miserable glittering carpet. You pull your ill-fitting coat a little tighter. It's an American uniform, but the insignia is for a unit that doesn't officially exist. Your mission, and the mission of hundreds like you from every allied nation, is not to round up the last of the enemy soldiers. It's to hunt for mines. The war of physics is over. The gold rush for physicists has begun. You and your Soviet counterparts, who you pretend not to see watching you from across the rubble-strewn street, are talent scouts in the world's most grim and consequential job fair. The prizes you're seeking aren't artists or poets. You're looking for the men who designed the V-2 rockets that terrorized London, the engineers who built the first jet fighters, and most preciously, the nuclear scientists who came terrifyingly close to building an atomic bomb for a madman. These weren't just engineers. They were the architects of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of reality. And in the chaotic power vacuum of post-war Germany, they were suddenly free agents. The moral complexities of their previous employment were, to put it mildly, set aside for the moment. It was a simple, brutal calculation made in Washington, London, and Moscow. The knowledge inside these men's heads could not be allowed to fall into the other guy's hands. More importantly, it absolutely had to be in your hands. This led to a frantic, often comical scramble across the occupied zones. Allied intelligence units, supposedly working together to denazify Germany, were instead secretly competing to snatch up the biggest scientific fish, hiding them from each other, and spiriting them away before anyone else could make a counteroffer. An authoritative historical fact is that the hunt was far from random. By May of 1945, American intelligence had secured what was known as the Ozenberg List. This wasn't some ancient scroll, but a mundane piece of German bureaucracy created by a Nazi official to track the nation's top scientific talent, pulling them back from frontline duties to work on critical weapons projects. The list, containing over 1,500 names, was discovered of all places stuffed in a toilet that had failed to flush properly in a hastily abandoned building at Bonn University. It instantly became the foundational document for America's recruitment drive, a veritable shopping list for world domination. You and your colleagues now had names, addresses, and specialties. The game was afoot. Your job is to approach these men who just weeks ago were your mortal enemies and make them an offer they can't refuse. It usually involves a guarantee of safety for their families, a comfortable life away from the ruins, and most importantly, a blind eye turned to their recent activities. It's a bit of a surreal pitch. Good afternoon, Herr Doctor. I know you've been busy trying to build a doomsday weapon for the Third Reich, but how would you feel about building a slightly better one for us? The benefits package is excellent. Suddenly, a lifetime of enthusiastic Nazism became a minor HR issue to be smoothed over with paperwork. Of course, the scientists themselves were often just as pragmatic. Take Werner von Braun, the charismatic and brilliant mind behind the V-2 rocket. For a quirky or off-topic fact, this titan of rocketry, a man who would later put Americans on the moon, didn't have his grand capture moment in a dramatic last stand in his secret lab. Instead, he broke his arm in a car accident while fleeing the advancing Allied armies. His driver fell asleep at the wheel, and von Braun, tired and on the run, ended up in a hospital surrendering to the Americans with his arm in a plaster cast. It's a strangely mundane detail in a life filled with monumental achievements and deep moral shadows. He and his team made a calculated decision to surrender to the Americans, correctly guessing they offered the best deal with more resources and perhaps fewer questions asked about their use of slave labor to build their rockets. You can almost feel the moral compass of the world spinning wildly, trying to find a new north. These operations were shrouded in the deepest secrecy, not just to keep them from the Soviets, but to keep them from the American and British public, who might have reasonably objected to seeing Nazi scientists rewarded with comfortable suburban lives. Historians still debate whether the pragmatic need to deny these brilliant minds to a future adversary like the Soviet Union justified the immense moral compromise of overlooking their pasts. Was it an unavoidable act of national security in the face of a new existential threat? Or was it a cynical betrayal of the very principles the war had been fought to defend? There is no easy answer, and you standing in the rubble don't have time for one. You have a list of names, and the man at the top of your list for today lives just down this street. He's a specialist in guidance systems, and you need to get to him before the Russians do. The sound of your knuckles on the cheap wood of the door is unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. For a long moment, there's only silence from within, the kind of silence that means someone is definitely home and hoping you'll just go away. You wait patiently. You have all the time in the world, and the man inside has very little. The door eventually creaks open just a few inches, and a pair of wary, intelligent eyes peer out at you from the gloom of the apartment. You give a slight, disarming smile, the kind you've been practicing. You're not here as a conqueror. You're here as an opportunity, a lifeboat. Herr Dr. Fischer, you ask softly. He doesn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes is enough. You hold up your identification, the one from the non-existent unit, and gently push the door open. The apartment smells of boiled cabbage and fear. Fisher, a thin man with glasses and a tweed jacket that has seen better decades, shrinks back as you step inside. You take in the sparse room, a few books, a threadbare rug, a single photograph of a wife, and two young daughters on the mantelpiece. This is your leverage right there in a cheap wooden frame. You don't even have to mention them. He knows. You begin the pitch. It's a script you know by heart. You talk about the future, about the importance of science, about continuing his vital research in a new, well-funded facility. You talk about safety, security, and a comfortable home for his family. You paint a picture of a life in America, a country he's only ever known as an enemy, but which you describe as a land of endless resources and scientific freedom. It's a recruitment drive that feels uncannily like a modern tech startup poaching talent from a failing rival, complete with a generous relocation package and a signing bonus. The main difference is that the alternative isn't staying with the failing company. It's being interrogated by the NKVD in the basement of a building down the street. That particular detail tends to make the offer of a 3-bedroom house in Ohio seem incredibly appealing. This whole clandestine enterprise has a name, though you'd never say it out loud to him. An authoritative historical fact is that the program was initially codenamed Operation Overcast. It was later, as the program became more formalized and the list of desirable scientists grew, that it was renamed Operation Paperclip. The name came from a beautifully simple bureaucratic solution when reviewing the files of the hundreds upon hundreds of German scientists and technicians. The ones deemed essential and relatively clean were selected for recruitment. Their official dossiers were then discreetly marked with a paperclip to separate them from the more ideologically fervent Nazis, slated for trial or simple dismissal. A man's entire future, his absolution from a dark past, came down to the quiet metallic slide of a paperclip onto his file. You watch Fisher's face as you talk. The fear is slowly being replaced by something else: calculation. He's a scientist after all. He's weighing the variables. On one side of the equation is his life here in ruins with a constant threat of reprisal or abduction. On the other side is your offer. You can see the gears turning. He asks about his lab, about his equipment. You reassure him he'll have the best of everything. He asks about his daughter's schooling. You tell him they'll go to excellent American schools and probably develop a baffling love for things like baseball and peanut butter. His shoulders relax just a fraction. He's starting to see the logic. The ideological gymnastics required to make the leap are impressive, but survival is a powerful motivator. Of course, the paperwork back at headquarters is an art form in itself. Each paperclip scientist has their biography carefully laundered. Their work for the Nazi war machine is rephrased as research conducted under duress or non-military applications. Their membership in the Nazi Party is noted as a formality required for professional advancement. It's a masterclass in bureaucratic whitewashing. This process, however, sometimes glossed over some truly monstrous activities. For a quirky, or rather deeply disturbing fact, one of the most prominent paperclip recruits was Dr. Hubertus Strughold, who became celebrated in America as the father of space medicine. His research was vital for understanding the effects of high-altitude flight and space travel on the human body. It wasn't until decades later in the 1990s that an investigation by the Department of Justice revealed credible evidence that some of his foundational research involved torturous and fatal experiments on prisoners from the Dachau concentration camp. By then, he had already died a celebrated American hero, his name adorning university buildings that later had to be quietly renamed. This is the hidden cost of the operation you're running. You aren't just recruiting minds. You are importing secrets and burying sins. Historians still debate whether the Apollo program, America's crowning achievement of the 20th century, could have succeeded on its ambitious timeline without the direct expertise of Wernher von Braun and his core team of 120 rocket scientists from Peenemünde. Were they indispensable geniuses, or would American engineers, given enough time and money, have solved the same problems on their own? The question hangs over the legacy of the space race. Did America get to the moon on its own merits, or on the back of a Faustian bargain struck in the rubble of the Third Reich? Fisher finally nods. I accept, he says, his voice barely a whisper. You slide a document across the table. It's the first of many he will sign. As his pen scratches across the paper, you feel a quiet sense of victory. You've just secured a valuable asset for your country. You've denied him to the Soviets. It's a good day's work. As you step back out into the chilly Berlin air, you notice a black Opel parked at the far end of the street. It wasn't there before. Two men in long coats sit inside watching. The game is always escalating. Your move was successful, but now it's their turn. You sit in the passenger seat of the black Opel, the engine off, the silence punctuated only by the quiet breathing of your partner and the distant rhythmic clang of a hammer on steel. Your knuckles are raw from the cold that seems to seep through the very metal of the car. You watch the American agent, the one with the clean-shaven face, and the too-new coat walk away from the apartment building. He has a spring in his step, the easy confidence of a salesman who just closed a deal. You take a long, slow drag from your cigarette, the cheap tobacco harsh against the back of your throat. You've lost this one. Dr. Fisher and his elegant little equations for rocket trajectories are now the property of the United States government. Your mission on the surface is identical to his, but the philosophy, the methods, the very soul of the operation could not be more different. He came with contracts and promises of a house with a white picket fence. You come with orders. He represents Operation Paperclip, a name that sounds like a tidy bit of office administration. You are part of a special commission under the direct authority of the most feared man in the Soviet Union, Lavrenti Beria, the head of the NKVD. An authoritative historical fact is that the Soviet program to acquire German atomic secrets was a massive state-driven undertaking where top Soviet physicists like Igor Kurchatov were given military ranks and sent into occupied Germany alongside crack NKVD units. Their goal was not just to recruit, but to acquire, to seize entire laboratories, confiscate research documents, and most critically, to find and secure every last ounce of uranium oxide they could. Where the Americans offered a new life, you offer a new purpose. It's a subtle but profound distinction. Your targets are also given a choice of course. It is the choice between continuing their brilliant work for the advancement of the world's first socialist state, or facing a deeply unpleasant and lengthy interview process regarding their previous work for the fascists. It's amazing how quickly people see the historical necessity of the first option. The voluntary nature of the agreement is understood by all parties. They are free to say no, but we cannot guarantee their family won't be selected for a spontaneous and lengthy cultural exchange program in the brisk, invigorating climate of Siberia. You don't just offer a job, you relocate the entire workplace. Your teams have been moving through the eastern zone of Germany like locusts with advanced degrees. You find a cutting-edge physics laboratory in Berlin-Dahlem. You don't just take the scientists. You have troops carefully disassemble the entire building, every cyclotron, every spectroscope, every dusty chalkboard, and load it onto a freight train bound for Moscow. You are packing up the intellectual capital of a nation and shipping it wholesale to the motherland. The accommodations provided at the destination are, you are told, excellent. They are certainly better than the re-education camps, which is the only other government housing on offer. The grand prize, of course, is the atom. While the Americans focus heavily on rocketry, your primary directive is the bomb. And you have had successes. For a quirky or off-topic fact, consider the case of Nikolaus Riehl. A leading German physicist in industrial radioactivity, he was invited to the Soviet Union in 1945. He was put in charge of uranium production for the nascent Soviet bomb project. He did his job so exceptionally well that after the successful test of their first atomic bomb, he was named a hero of socialist labor, one of the highest honors in the USSR. He was given a fine house, a car, and a country dacha. Then, in 1955, after his work was done, he was allowed to return to a quiet life in Germany. He is your program's greatest success story, a testament to the rewards of pragmatic cooperation. He is the man you mention when a new candidate seems hesitant. But the truth is more complicated. Historians still debate whether the Soviet atomic bomb project was truly kick-started by the German scientists they captured, or if their main contribution was simply confirming that the Soviets' own brilliant physicists were already on the right track. The intelligence gathered by spies within the American Manhattan Project was arguably far more valuable than any single German mind. The Germans were a helpful accelerant, perhaps, but the engine of the Soviet bomb was already being built at home. For the scientists themselves, life is a gilded cage. They are settled in isolated, comfortable, and heavily guarded research towns known colloquially as sharashkas. They have access to things most Soviet citizens can only dream of: better food, private housing, imported goods. But they are prisoners. Their mail is read, their conversations are monitored, and they cannot leave. They have traded one form of totalitarianism for another, slightly more comfortable one. You are not just their handler. You are their warden. Your partner crushes his cigarette out on the car's floor. "That's two this week the Americans have poached from our list," he grumbles. You nod, already scanning your own notes. The next name is a specialist in isotopic enrichment, a key player. You cannot afford to lose him. The sun is setting, casting long, distorted shadows from the ruined buildings. The Americans' method of slow, polite seduction is effective, but it is time-consuming. You don't have that luxury. Your orders from Moscow are clear results, not excuses. You tap your driver on the shoulder. Let's go, you say. We'll visit Dr. Schmidt, and this time we won't bother knocking. You might think the real game is being played here in the rubble of a fallen Germany, a physical contest for the men who hold the future in their minds. The frantic scramble for scientists, the tense standoffs between intelligence units, the overt acts of theft and coercion, it all feels so tangible, so direct. But while you and your counterparts are busy with this brutish tug-of-war, a far more elegant and devastating form of espionage is already deeply entrenched, operating silently from within the very heart of the Western Alliance. This secret war isn't being won by grabbing people off the street. It's being won over glasses of sherry in the warm, wood-paneled common rooms of Cambridge University. Let's rewind the clock a little. Imagine you are a young man at Cambridge in the early 1930s. The world is a frightening place. The Great Depression has shattered faith in capitalism, and the monstrous shadows of fascism are spreading across mainland Europe. You are young, brilliant, idealistic, and terrified. You and your friends, an elite circle of intellectuals, gather late into the night, surrounded by the scent of old books and pipe tobacco, and you argue passionately about what is to be done. To many of you, the bumbling, appeasing governments of the West seem weak and decadent. The only force that appears to have the ideological muscle and the sheer will to stand against Hitler's rising tide is the Soviet Union. Communism, you decide, isn't just an economic theory. It is the only viable weapon in the fight for humanity's future. This potent mix of fear, intellect, and idealism was the perfect breeding ground for a new kind of spy. Soviet handlers themselves, often cultured and sophisticated, didn't need to offer money. They offered something far more seductive: a purpose. They recruited a handful of these brilliant young men not for short-term gains, but for the long game. The plan was simple: get your degrees, be exceptional, and let your natural talent and, more importantly, your impeccable social standing carry you into the highest echelons of the British government. This was the genesis of what would later be known as the Cambridge Five. An authoritative historical fact is that this spy ring consisted of 5 core members: Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and the last to be publicly identified, John Cairncross. Their greatest asset wasn't a miniature camera or a hollowed-out coin. It was their membership in the British ruling class. They were products of the old boy network, a world where the right accent, the right school tie, and a familiarity with the right people were more valuable than any security vetting. It was simply inconceivable to the established order that a charming, witty chap one played squash with at the club could be a dedicated servant of a foreign power. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination, a form of class-based blindness that the Soviets exploited with masterful precision. And so, they rose. Kim Philby, the most formidable of the group, climbed the ladder of MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service. Donald MacLean secured a high-level post in the Foreign Office and later the British Embassy in Washington, with access to top-secret diplomatic and atomic intelligence. Guy Burgess, flamboyant and often drunk, used his positions at the BBC and as a diplomat to gather information. John Cairncross worked at the Treasury, the Cabinet Office, and most crucially at Bletchley Park, the center of British code-breaking during the war. All the while, they were diligently photographing documents, memorizing conversations, and passing a constant stream of priceless intelligence to their handlers in Moscow. Historians still debate whether the intelligence passed by the Cambridge Five was merely supplementary to what the Soviets already knew through other means, or if it fundamentally altered the strategic balance of the early Cold War, particularly by confirming the scale and progress of the Allied atomic bomb project. The sheer audacity of their cover is at times difficult to fathom. For a truly quirky, almost unbelievable fact, consider Anthony Blunt. He served in MI5, the domestic security service, during the war. After the war, his career took a rather public and prestigious turn. He became a world-renowned art historian and was appointed surveyor of the Queen's pictures, placing him in charge of the royal family's immense art collection. He was Sir Anthony Blunt, a respected member of the establishment, a knight of the realm, living and working within the very walls of Buckingham Palace, all while having been a dedicated Soviet agent. His secret was so well kept that even after he confessed to the authorities in 1964, in exchange for immunity, his role was concealed from the public for another 15 years. The man in charge of the Queen's art was a communist spy. It's the kind of plot twist that would be rejected from a spy novel for being too unbelievable. So as we return to our scene in 1945, this is the hidden reality. While your American self is focused on getting German scientists out, and your Soviet self is focused on getting them, and men like Kim Philby are already at the heart of the machine. He's not just a spy, he's a senior British intelligence officer. He's helping to run the very operations designed to counter the Soviet threat. He's reading the reports about the German scientists. He knows about paperclip. He knows what the West knows, what it fears, and what it plans to do next. The infiltration isn't just a crack in the wall. The spies are helping to build the house, and they have their own set of blueprints. The game is far more compromised than anyone in that chilly, rubble-strewn Berlin street could possibly imagine. The Cambridge spies were confident, and for good reason. They were insulated by class, protected by their positions, and certain that their communications with Moscow were impenetrable. From their perspective, inside the warm, exclusive clubs of London and the bustling corridors of Washington, D.C., their secret world was perfectly secure. They were the ultimate insiders, ghosts in the machine. But every secret conversation, no matter how carefully encoded, leaves a faint echo in the air. And in a quiet, nondescript building far from the intrigue of European capitals, a handful of people were learning how to hear those echoes. You are not in a smoky Berlin cafe or a Cambridge dormitory. You are in Arlington Hall, Virginia, a former women's junior college that has been converted into the headquarters of the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service. Your world is a small, brightly lit, windowless room that smells perpetually of hot vacuum tubes, old paper, and stale coffee. There are no spies here, no guns, no clandestine meetings. There is only you, a comfortable chair, and a mountain of numbers. Your job is to stare at endless pages of intercepted Soviet diplomatic and intelligence traffic pages filled with 5-digit numerical groups and somehow make them speak. It is quite possibly the most important and most boring job in the entire Cold War. This monumentally tedious and top-secret effort was called the Venona Project. An authoritative historical fact is that this program, which began in 1943 and would run all the way to 1980, was tasked with the seemingly impossible decrypting messages from Soviet intelligence agencies like the NKVD and the GRU. At first, the task seemed hopeless. The Soviets used a code system based on one-time pads, which, if used correctly, are mathematically unbreakable. Each message is encrypted with a unique randomly generated key. As long as the key is never ever reused, the message is pure gibberish to anyone without that specific key. For years, your work is fruitless. You and your colleagues sift through hundreds of thousands of messages, finding nothing. It's like trying to read every book in a library that has been shredded into individual letters. And then you get a miracle born of human error. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the entire Venona project hinged on a single catastrophic blunder made by Soviet code clerks in Moscow during the war. Either pressed for time or running short on supplies, they did the one thing you must never do with a one-time pad system. They reused some of the key pages. They printed duplicate sets of keys. It was a tiny crack in a perfect wall of security, but it was enough. For the cryptanalysts at Arlington Hall, it was like being given 2 different letters written in the same secret code. By comparing them, you could slowly, painstakingly begin to work out the underlying language. It was the Rosetta Stone for Soviet espionage. The work is agonizing. It can take a team months to decrypt a single message. Sometimes, after weeks of effort, a message reveals nothing more than a request for a new supply of paper clips for the Soviet consulate in San Francisco. It's a special kind of intellectual torment. But slowly, message by message, a ghostly picture begins to emerge from the static. You begin to see code names: Caliber, Mole, Liberal. Then more specific ones: Homer, who seems to be passing secrets from the British Embassy in Washington; Stanley, who has access to high-level British intelligence. You have no idea who these people are in real life, but you get to know their secret selves intimately through their decrypted traffic. They become characters in the world's most exclusive and terrifying book club. Gradually, the scale of the infiltration becomes terrifyingly clear. You and your colleagues uncover evidence of a vast network of spies operating throughout the West. You find proof that a physicist at the Los Alamos laboratory, Klaus Fuchs, has been feeding the most sensitive details of the Manhattan Project directly to Moscow. The Soviets didn't just steal the atomic bomb, they were given the blueprints by spies on the inside. You see the tendrils of Soviet intelligence reaching into the State Department, the Treasury, and the White House itself. This creates an almost unbearable paradox. You hold in your hands undeniable proof of massive high-level treason, but you cannot use it. The Venona Project is the single most important secret the United States possesses. If you were to arrest a spy and present a decrypted Venona message as evidence in court, the Soviets would know in an instant that their codes were broken. They would change them immediately, and your precious window into their world would slam shut forever. The information is too valuable to be revealed. This meant that for decades, the FBI could only use the intelligence as hints to know who to watch, who to investigate using other means, but never revealing the true source. It's like being a detective who has solved the murder but can't tell anyone, forced to watch the killer walk free, while you secretly guide other detectives to find different clues. Historians still debate whether President Truman was fully briefed on the extent of the Venona findings, or if senior intelligence officials like J. Edgar Hoover, wary of the political firestorm and the risk of compromising the source, deliberately kept the most explosive details compartmentalized even from the Oval Office. It's possible the President of the United States had no idea just how deeply his own government had been penetrated. So while Kim Philby and Donald McLean carry on their important work in London and Washington confident in their secrecy, you, the quiet codebreaker in Virginia, are slowly mapping their ghosts. You are pulling their own words, their own betrayals out of the silent air. The net woven from laziness in Moscow and genius in Virginia is closing. It is moving with agonizing slowness, but it is moving. And soon the hunt for Homer and Stanley will begin in earnest. The painstaking work of the Venona codebreakers in their quiet Virginia room provided an incredible, almost supernatural glimpse into the past. It was like reading your enemy's diary from 5 years ago. But in the escalating tension of the early 1950s, the past wasn't enough. Western intelligence agencies were desperate to know what the Soviets were planning now, what they were whispering to each other tonight. They needed a live feed. And to get it, they decided to move from the abstract world of cryptography back to the physical grit of the Cold War's primary battleground, the divided city of Berlin. Your new job is an engineering problem of breathtaking audacity. You are standing in what appears to be a newly constructed American military warehouse in Rudow, a sleepy suburb in the American sector of West Berlin. From the outside, it looks official, boring, and legitimate, but in the lead-lined basement, you and a team of British and American engineers are about to begin digging. Your destination is a set of 3 crucial telecommunication cables buried 6 feet beneath a street in the Soviet sector nearly a third of a mile away. Your task is to tunnel under the heavily guarded border, intercept those cables, and tap into the most secret conversations of the Soviet military headquarters, all without them ever knowing you were there. It is the Cold War equivalent of trying to perform brain surgery on a sleeping bear from the inside of a gopher hole. The project is given the appropriately grand and simple codename Operation Gold. An authoritative historical fact is that this joint CIA and MI6 operation resulted in a tunnel 476 feet long, a marvel of secret engineering for its time. It was a massive undertaking. Over 3,000 tons of soil had to be excavated by hand, packed into burlap sacks, and secretly driven away at night to be disposed of in various unrelated construction projects around West Berlin. The logistics of just getting rid of the dirt without raising suspicion was an operation in itself. The official cover story for all this activity was the construction of a radar station. It was a thin excuse, one that surely prompted a few sarcastic eye rolls from the Soviet intelligence officers watching from across the border. Ah, yes, comrade, radar stations. They always require the midnight removal of thousands of tons of soil and a curious lack of any actual radar dish. But the cover had to be maintained. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the warehouse built to hide the tunnel's entrance was an elaborate piece of theater. Its upper floors were filled with humming electronic equipment and radio receivers to sell the story of it being a communications listening post. They even broadcast mundane, low-level radio signals, creating a constant electronic chatter designed to convince any Soviet eavesdroppers that this was just a normal, boring surveillance base and not the entrance to the most ambitious wiretapping operation in history. You descend into the vertical shaft, leaving the gray Berlin sky behind. Down here, the air is cool and damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and machine oil. The tunnel stretches out before you, a narrow, brilliantly lit tube lined with steel and humming with the low thrum of ventilation fans. It feels less like a spy operation and more like a subterranean laboratory. The work is slow, dangerous, and claustrophobic. The constant fear isn't just a tunnel collapse, but the sound of digging from the other direction, the horrifying realization that you've been discovered. But the weeks turn into months, and the digging continues inch by painstaking inch, under houses, under streets, and finally, under the fortified border itself. Historians still debate whether the planners were driven by genuine confidence in their ability to maintain secrecy, or by a kind of institutional arrogance, a belief that such a bold and technically complex operation was simply beyond the Soviets' ability to detect or even imagine. Were they bold visionaries or just incredibly lucky? Either way, their gamble seemed to be paying off. Finally, after nearly 6 months, you reach the target. In a specially constructed chamber at the end of the tunnel, engineers working with the delicate precision of surgeons carefully expose the 3 thick cables. They don't cut them. Instead, they attach special clamps that can register the faint electronic impulses passing through the wires inside without breaking the connection. These signals are then amplified and sent back down the tunnel to your and the American side. In the warehouse above a massive bank of hundreds of tape recorders sputters to life. The voices of Soviet generals, of NKVD colonels, of diplomats and commissars begin to pour out of the machines. You've done it. You have a direct line into the central nervous system of your enemy in Germany. The intelligence is overwhelming, a fire hose of information. You record everything from gossip about promotions to secret military deployments. It is an intelligence coup of staggering proportions. For 11 months, the tapes spin. The analysts are buried in transcripts, piecing together a priceless picture of the Soviet war machine. You and your colleagues feel a deep sense of professional pride, a belief that you have given the West an unassailable advantage. You have outsmarted them, out-engineered them. You are invincible. But a secret you are beginning to learn is a fragile thing. And the most dangerous secrets are not the ones you are trying to steal, but the ones that are already hiding in plain sight in your own offices, offered up by trusted colleagues with impeccable credentials and a friendly smile. The greatest intelligence victory of the early Cold War is built on a foundation of sand, and the tide is about to come in. For 11 perfect months, the secret held. In your subterranean world in Berlin, you and your colleagues were the unseen gods of espionage, listening to the murmurs of an empire. The reels of magnetic tape spun endlessly, a quiet, reassuring hiss that was the soundtrack to the West's greatest intelligence victory. You sifted through thousands of hours of conversation, identifying commanders, tracking troop movements, learning the rhythms and routines of the Soviet war machine. You felt for the first time that you were a step ahead. The sheer volume of data was intoxicating. It felt like truth. It felt like power. It was unfortunately a lie. The devastating secret at the heart of Operation Gold wasn't buried under a Berlin street. It was sitting comfortably in a high-level planning meeting in London, nearly a year before the first shovel ever broke the earth. The betrayal didn't come from a clever Soviet probe or a lucky discovery. It came from one of your own. While American and British engineers were drawing up blueprints for their audacious tunnel, a trusted high-ranking officer in Britain's MI6 was taking his own set of careful notes. He listened politely, nodded in agreement, and then, at his earliest convenience, he met with his KGB handler and told the Soviets everything. An authoritative historical fact is that the mole who compromised Operation Gold from its inception was George Blake. A decorated intelligence officer, Blake had become a committed communist during a stint in a North Korean prison camp, and upon his return to service, acted as one of the most effective double agents of the Cold War. He saw the plans for the tunnel not as a brilliant intelligence operation, but as an act of imperialist aggression, and he handed over every last detail to Moscow without a moment's hesitation. This presented the KGB with a fascinating and delicate problem. Their first instinct naturally was to expose the tunnel immediately and humiliate the West. But if they did that, the CIA and MI6 would know with absolute certainty that there was a traitor at the highest level of their planning committee. The hunt for the mole would begin, and Blake would be compromised. A source as valuable as George Blake was worth far more than one foiled operation. So the Soviets made a brilliantly cynical calculation: let them build it. Let the Americans and British spend millions of dollars and take immense risks to construct their marvelous secret tunnel. Protect the mole at all costs. And so the greatest intelligence coup of the decade was transformed into the world's most elaborate puppet show. The Soviets knew you were listening, so they began to perform for you. They rerouted their most sensitive high-level communications away from the tapped cables. Anything truly important, anything about their atomic program, their intelligence operations, or their strategic war plans was sent through other secure channels. But they couldn't let the lines go silent, as that would raise suspicion. So they fed the cables a carefully curated diet of information. It was a masterful mix of genuine low-level chatter to make it all seem authentic gossip supply. Requisitions, troop rotations sprinkled with subtle, almost undetectable pieces of disinformation. It's a bit like knowing your phone is tapped, so you spend hours talking to your friend about your very real and very boring grocery list, occasionally throwing in a misleading comment that you're planning a trip to a city you have no intention of visiting. Historians still debate whether the intelligence from the tunnel, despite being compromised, still held significant value. Did the sheer volume of low-level authentic chatter still provide a useful baseline understanding of the Soviet military's structure and readiness, or was the entire operation a colossal waste of resources, a masterclass in Soviet deception that tied up hundreds of Western analysts for nearly a year? The end came with the same theatrical flair that had characterized the entire deception. On the night of April 21, 1956, a crew of Soviet and East German engineers, supposedly out repairing a faulty cable in the rain, accidentally broke through the tunnel wall. The discovery was anything but quiet. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the Soviets turned the incident into a massive propaganda spectacle. They invited journalists from around the world to tour the villainous spy tunnel, showcasing the sophisticated Western bugging equipment and decrying the perfidious nature of the capitalist powers. It was a public relations disaster for the CIA and MI6, who were made to look not only sinister, but even worse, incompetent. For you, the analyst who had spent a year of your life listening to those tapes, the news is a cold, hollow shock. The thousands of hours of work, the moments of elation when you thought you'd uncovered a key secret, the intricate maps of the Soviet command structure you'd so carefully drawn, it all curdles into a sickening sense of futility. You weren't a spy, you were an audience member, and you had been applauding a script written by the KGB. The disillusionment is profound. If you can't trust the enemy's own words, and you can't trust your own colleagues, what is left? For some in the CIA, this devastating betrayal pushed them toward a darker, more desperate kind of secret war. If you couldn't trust information from the outside, perhaps the answer was to find a way to control the source itself, the human mind. The revelation of the Berlin Tunnel's betrayal leaves a permanent stain on the psyche of the agency. It's a deep institutional trauma. The triumphant swagger of the past year evaporates, replaced by a gnawing, corrosive paranoia. If your greatest success was actually a masterfully managed Soviet theater production, then what can you possibly trust? If your own trusted allies are moles, who can you talk to? The fear that haunted the West wasn't just of Soviet tanks rolling through Europe anymore. It was a more intimate psychological fear. It was the fear of brainwashing of sleeper agents, of men turned against their will. It was the era of the Manchurian Candidate. And in the dark corners of the CIA, a terrifying new logic began to take hold. If the Soviets have a way to control the human mind, we must get there first. You are no longer an engineer digging in the dirt or an analyst staring at numbers. Your new job title is vague, but your mandate is simple and chilling. You are to explore the furthest frontiers of psychological warfare. You are to find a way to make a person reveal their deepest secrets, to make them an unwitting courier, or even to make them carry out an act against their own moral code. You are now part of Project MK Ultra. An authoritative historical fact is that this was a top-secret and highly illegal CIA program sanctioned in 1953. Its official purpose was to develop drugs and procedures that could be used in interrogations, and to control human behavior largely as a response to perceived Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean advances in brainwashing techniques. The project begins as a series of brainstorming sessions that sound like they were scripted by a pulp horror writer. Can we use hypnosis? Sensory deprivation, subliminal messaging? What about exotic poisons or strange new electronics? But the real obsession, the chemical holy grail, becomes a new and incredibly powerful hallucinogen, LSD. The CIA, in its quest to weaponize the mind, becomes one of the world's earliest and most enthusiastic proponents of acid. Their approach is less scientific method and more, let's buy a huge amount of this stuff, give it to people, and see what happens. It is a chaotic, dangerous, and wildly unethical shotgun blast of experimentation. The key to any experiment, of course, is the test subject, and MKUltra had a firm policy of not seeking volunteers. Instead, the project preyed on the vulnerable. You dose prisoners in federal penitentiaries, telling them it's a new medicine. You administer drugs to patients in mental hospitals, people whose incoherent ramblings can be easily dismissed. The project's reach is insidious, spreading through a network of front organizations, research grants to universities, and private doctors who are willing to ask few questions in exchange for government funding. Even CIA agents themselves are sometimes drugged without their consent, with LSD slipped into their morning coffee to test its effects on an unsuspecting subject. It's a workplace environment that would make for a truly spectacular HR violation report. The project spirals into bizarre and sinister sub-operations. For a truly quirky and disturbing fact, one of the most infamous of these was dubbed Operation Midnight Climax. This involved the CIA setting up a network of brothels or safe houses in San Francisco and New York. Unwitting men were lured to these houses by prostitutes who were on the CIA payroll. The men would be served a drink laced with LSD and then taken to a bedroom to be observed by agents from behind a two-way mirror. The agents, sometimes sipping cocktails of their own, would watch and take notes on the drug's effect on the man's libido and inhibitions. It was a sordid, voyeuristic marriage of espionage and exploitation, a perfect snapshot of the program's moral bankruptcy. You read the reports from these sessions, and they are a catalog of human misery and confusion. The drug doesn't reveal secrets, it creates fantasies. It doesn't lead to controllable behavior, it leads to unpredictable terror or uncontrollable laughter. The quest for a truth serum yields only garbled, unreliable nonsense. The dream of creating a programmable assassin remains just that, a dream. Historians still debate whether MKUltra ever produced a single piece of actionable intelligence or any reliable mind control technique. The overwhelming consensus is that the entire multi-million-dollar, decades-long project was a catastrophic failure. It was a paranoid fantasy pursued at immense human cost, ruining lives, ending careers, and leading to at least one death, that of CIA scientist Frank Olson, who fell from a New York hotel window after being secretly dosed. It produced nothing of value for national security, only a legacy of shame and a trove of conspiracy theories, many of which turned out to be less strange than the actual truth. You sit under the fluorescent hum of your office light reading a transcript from an Operation Midnight Climax session. The subject, a random civilian, is describing how the wood grain on the wall is melting into a river of snakes. It is useless. The grand plan to build a better spy by breaking the human mind has failed. The project was born from the fear that the agency couldn't trust the outside world. Now, looking at the dark path it has taken you down, you realize you can't even trust yourself. The search for control had led only to chaos. Perhaps some begin to think the answer isn't in the messy, unpredictable realm of human psychology. Perhaps the answer lies, as it so often does, in technology. In a machine that can fly higher and see further than any human eye, a machine that cannot be tricked, compromised, or broken. The dark, messy corridors of Project MKUltra led to a dead end of paranoia and ruined lives. The quest to weaponize the human mind had failed, producing nothing but bad data and a deep sense of institutional shame. So the agency, bruised by betrayal and disillusioned with the murky world of human intelligence, turned its gaze upward. If secrets couldn't be reliably coaxed from the minds of men, perhaps they could be stolen cleanly and elegantly from the sky. The new strategy was simple. Don't go through the back door. Just fly over the house at an altitude so high no one will even know you're there. This pivot from psychology to technology led you to a secret place in the Nevada desert, a dry lake bed known as Groom Lake, a place that would one day become a legend in its own right, better known as Area 51. Here, in the intense heat and secrecy, a new kind of machine was born. An authoritative historical fact is that this aircraft, the Lockheed U-2, was a top-secret reconnaissance plane developed by Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division, led by the brilliant engineer Kelly Johnson. It was designed with a single, seemingly impossible purpose: to fly at a sustained altitude of over 70,000 feet, far beyond the reach of any known Soviet fighter jet or surface-to-air missile. It was, in essence, a jet-powered glider with a light, delicate frame and enormous, graceful wings that allowed it to soar in the thin air at the edge of space. You are one of the handful of pilots chosen for this program. You are not a hotshot fighter jock, but a calm, steady hand capable of enduring immense physical and mental strain for hours on end. Your pre-flight ritual is a testament to the strangeness of your job. You eat a special low-residue steak and eggs breakfast, a polite way of saying the mission is too long and your pressure suit too cumbersome for any unscheduled biological breaks. The glamour of espionage is truly something to behold. You are then sealed into what is effectively a spacesuit breathing pure oxygen for an hour before the flight to purge the nitrogen from your blood, preventing the bends if your cockpit were to ever lose pressure. Taking off in the U-2, nicknamed the Dragon Lady, is a bizarre experience. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the plane is so uniquely designed for high-altitude flight that it's notoriously difficult to operate near the ground. To save weight, it has a bicycle-style landing gear with two main wheels under the fuselage. To keep the enormous wings from dragging on the runway, two detachable stilts like training wheels are slotted into the wings. These pogos clatter off onto the runway as you take off. The real fun comes when you have to land. The plane loves to float just above the runway, refusing to settle. Because of this, another U-2 pilot in a high-performance chase car, a souped-up GTO or Camaro, has to race down the runway behind you, talking you down, calling out your altitude in feet. You're at 10 feet, 6, 4, 2, 1. It's an absurdly low-tech solution for one of the most high-tech machines on the planet. Some pilots joked that it flies like an archangel but lands like a drunken flamingo. But up there at 70,000 feet, it is a place of serene, untouchable majesty. Your cockpit is your entire world. Below you, the earth is a brilliant, silent curve. Above you, the sky is not blue, but a deep, dark, mesmerizing violet. You are flying so high that you can see the weather patterns, the thunderstorms and cloud banks as things that happen far beneath you. You are for all intents and purposes alone in the universe, and below you lies the Soviet Union, the most closed-off secret society on Earth, laid bare to the gaze of your camera. The massive, specially designed camera in the belly of your plane clicks and whirs, capturing miles of high-resolution film, with each shot revealing secret airfields, naval bases, and nuclear test sites. For several years, the program is a stunning success. You and your fellow pilots crisscross the Soviet Union with impunity. Soviet radar sees you, a faint blip on their screens, but their fighters flame out in the thin air long before they can reach you. Their missiles, they believe, cannot touch you. You are a silver ghost in the stratosphere. The intelligence you bring back is invaluable. It is clear, photographic, and undeniable. Historians still debate whether the U-2's most crucial contribution was in what it found or in what it didn't find. The photographs revealed the locations of Soviet bomber bases and missile test sites, which was vital. But they also proved that many of America's greatest fears were unfounded. The intelligence debunked the bomber gap, the belief that the Soviets had a massive, superior fleet of long-range bombers. Later, it would begin to do the same for the missile gap. You were providing proof that the monster behind the curtain, while still dangerous, was not nearly as 10 feet tall as the politicians and generals in Washington feared. This vital negative intelligence helped prevent unnecessary panic and a potentially catastrophic arms race escalation. Cruising high above the Ural Mountains, you feel a sense of absolute security. The mission is going perfectly. The camera is working flawlessly. Down below, a continent of secrets unspools beneath your wings. This, you think, is how the game should be played. No messy human emotions, no traitors, no unreliable reports. Just a machine, a camera, and the pure, cold, hard light of day. But technology is a race, and even at 70,000 feet, you cannot outfly physics forever. Far below, on a dusty launch pad, Soviet engineers are preparing a new kind of missile, one designed to climb just that little bit higher, to reach out and swat that untouchable silver ghost from their sky. You are Francis Gary Powers. It is May 1st, 1960. May Day, the biggest holiday on the Soviet calendar. Below you, millions of people are watching parades of tanks and missiles, a spectacle of military might. You, however, have a much better view. From your perch at 70,000 feet, you are looking down on the very heart of the Soviet industrial and military complex near Sverdlovsk. The flight has been long 9 hours in a cramped cockpit, but it's been routine. The camera whirs, the sky is a placid deep violet. You are a ghost, an invisible eye completely safe in your untouchable silver machine. You have no reason to believe this flight will be any different from the 24 successful U-2 missions that have come before it. Then your world dissolves into a violent, silent flash of orange. You don't hear an explosion in the thin air, but you feel it, a dull, crushing thud that reverberates through the entire airframe. Your delicate glider-like plane is violently torn apart by the concussion from a missile you never saw coming. The long, graceful wings snap, and the U-2 begins to tumble, spinning wildly out of control toward the Earth 13 miles below. You are pinned to your seat by the G-forces fighting to release the canopy and escape. You wrestle yourself free and bail out into the void, the crippled plane falling away beneath you. After a terrifying freefall, your parachute opens with a reassuring jolt, and you find yourself floating in an immense, profound silence, slowly descending into the heart of the nation you have been spying on for years. On the ground, you are no longer an invisible specter of American technology. You are just a man in a strange suit, landing hard in a farmer's field, quickly surrounded by bewildered and angry locals. Your instructions in case of capture are clear. You have a silver dollar in your pocket, and hidden inside it is a tiny pin coated with a lethal shellfish toxin. A thoughtful little parting gift from the agency. You decide to take your chances with the Russians. Back in Washington, the mission is long overdue. The assumption is made the plane is lost, the pilot is dead, the self-destruct mechanism has destroyed the evidence. The well-rehearsed cover story is released to the press. A NASA weather research plane, you see, had gone missing. The pilot had reported oxygen difficulties while flying over Turkey. It was a tragic accident. It's a plausible, calming, and utterly false narrative. NASA even wheels out a U-2 painted in its own colors to show the press, helpfully explaining how it's used to study cloud formations and jet streams, conveniently omitting the giant high-resolution spy camera and the suicide pin. In Moscow, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev is having a very good day. His military has finally done what he has been demanding for years. They have swatted the fly from their sky. An authoritative historical fact is that on May 1, 1960, Power's U-2 was brought down by a newly deployed S-75 Divina surface-to-air missile. But Khrushchev knows he has more than just the wreckage. He has the pilot alive and talking. He has the camera. And he has the film. He decides to let the Americans play out their little lie. He waits. A few days later, he springs his trap. In a grand speech, he announces that an American spy plane has been shot down. The U.S. State Department, still believing the pilot is dead, doubles down on their lie, calling Khrushchev's claim baseless. This is the moment Khrushchev has been waiting for. With theatrical flair, he reveals his trump cards to the world: the living pilot Francis Gary Powers and the remarkably intact wreckage of his spy plane. The American cover story collapses in an instant, a global humiliation. The incident is a chaotic mess on all sides. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the Soviets were so eager to bring down the U-2 that they launched a volley of 14 missiles. In the confusion, a second missile accidentally struck a Soviet MiG-19 fighter that had been scrambled to intercept Powers, killing the pilot, Sergei Safronov. This detail, a tragic friendly fire incident, was kept secret by the Soviets for decades. The diplomatic fallout is catastrophic. The incident occurs just before a crucial four-power summit in Paris, where President Eisenhower and Khrushchev were supposed to ease Cold War tensions. The summit collapses in a storm of accusations and denials. Historians still debate whether Nikita Khrushchev deliberately used the U-2 incident to sabotage the Paris summit, which he believed would yield no benefits for the USSR, or if he was genuinely enraged by the brazen violation of Soviet airspace and embarrassed by his military's past failures, forcing him to take a hardline stance he couldn't back down from. The age of the untouchable spy plane is over. The secret is out exposed for the entire world to see. In Moscow, the wreckage of your U-2 is put on public display in Gorky Park, a monument to American treachery and Soviet triumph. And you, Gary Powers, are put on trial, a single lonely pawn in a global game sentenced to 10 years for espionage. Your capture shatters the CIA's confidence and forces them to find new, even more secret ways to peer over the Iron Curtain. The failure of manned flight would lead directly to the acceleration of unmanned satellites, but it also lit a fire for another kind of project, something even more audacious, more technically daring, and more impossibly secret than flying to the edge of space. The public humiliation of the Gary Powers incident left the CIA with a deep institutional scar. The agency's confidence was shattered, and its reliance on high-altitude flight was proven to be fallible. For years, they searched for a new way to regain the initiative to score a victory so profound, so technically brilliant, and so secret that it would wash away the stain of the U-2 affair. In 1968, the ocean quietly offered them that chance. A Soviet Golf II-class submarine, the K-129, carrying nuclear-armed ballistic missiles and a treasure trove of cryptographic secrets, suffered a catastrophic internal explosion and sank to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The Soviets searched for it and failed. But the Americans, using a network of underwater listening posts, found it. Your new project isn't about altitude, it's about depth. 3 miles of it. You are part of a small, deeply classified team tasked with the most audacious heist in history. The plan is not to photograph the submarine, not to analyze its sonar signature from afar, but to physically lift the entire 2,000-ton vessel from the seabed 16,000 feet below the surface. It is an undertaking so complex and unprecedented it sounds like pure science fiction. This was the birth of Project Azorian. First, you need a cover story. How do you explain building a massive, one-of-a-kind ship and parking it in one spot in the middle of the Pacific for months on end? The answer was a stroke of genius. You would tell the world you were going into the business of deep-sea mining. You would be searching for manganese nodules, small potato-sized rocks rich in minerals. It was the perfect cover story because it was so fantastically boring that no journalist or rival spy would ever want to ask a follow-up question. To make the story stick, the CIA went to incredible lengths. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the agency and its contractors actually funded legitimate oceanographic research, filed patents for undersea mining equipment, and published scholarly articles on the subject, building a completely believable and completely false corporate identity. To further sell the lie, you needed a front man, someone whose reputation for ambition and eccentricity would make such a bizarre venture seem plausible. You found the perfect candidate, the reclusive, enigmatic, and fabulously wealthy billionaire Howard Hughes. His company, Hughes Tool Company, officially sponsored the project. Because when you want to build a top-secret spy vessel, who better to partner with than the world's most famous shut-in, it was a match made in espionage heaven. The result was a ship unlike any other on Earth, the Hughes Glomar Explorer. An authoritative historical fact is that this 619-foot-long vessel was purpose-built for Project Azorian. It wasn't an ordinary ship. It contained a massive derrick, a hidden internal bay, large enough to hold a submarine known as a moon pool, and, most importantly, a colossal mechanical claw. This capture vehicle, nicknamed Clementine, was essentially a giant version of the claw game at an arcade, designed to be lowered 3 miles down, position itself over the sunken submarine, and gently grasp it in its immense talons. You are on board the Glomar Explorer in the summer of 1974. For 6 years, the project has lived only in blueprints and secret meetings. Now you are floating directly above the grave of the K-129. The ship is a hive of quiet, tense activity. The massive claw is lowered through the moon pool, descending on a thick steel pipe string into the crushing blackness. The descent takes days. You watch grainy black and white video feeds from cameras on the capture vehicle, seeing the strange alien world of the abyssal plane. Then you see it. The mangled hull of the Soviet submarine resting silently in the silt. The claw positions itself perfectly. The hydraulic arms close around the submarine's hull. The lift begins. For days, the powerful winches on the Glomar Explorer pull agonizingly slowly, raising their prize from the deep. It is a moment of supreme triumph. You are defying the laws of physics and the limits of the ocean, wresting a secret directly from the abyss. And then disaster strikes. About halfway up, a catastrophic metal failure occurs in the claw. The immense strain is too much. The submarine, already damaged, breaks apart. You watch on the monitors as the largest and most valuable section, the part containing the conning tower, the code room, and the missile silos, cracks off and begins its long, silent 3-mile journey back to the ocean floor. It is lost forever. A smaller forward section, however, remains in the claw's grip. It is a partial success and a bitter disappointment. The 38-foot section of the bow is successfully brought up into the ship's cavernous hidden moon pool. Historians still debate whether this recovered section contained the most valuable intelligence the CIA was after, such as nuclear torpedoes and acoustic technology, or if the truly critical components, the codebooks and cryptographic machines, were lost when the submarine broke apart. The agency recovered the bodies of 6 Soviet sailors from the wreckage, and in a secret ceremony on the deck of the Glomar Explorer. You hold a formal burial at sea for them, complete with the Soviet national anthem, a mark of respect for fellow sailors, even those of an enemy nation. The project is a staggering feat of engineering, a partial but still valuable intelligence victory. You have proven the impossible can be done. But before your analysts can even begin to properly examine your prize, the secret of Project Azorian begins to leak, not from a mole or a spy, but from a completely unexpected direction, a bizarre, unrelated burglary of Howard Hughes's offices in Los Angeles. The world's deepest secret is about to be dragged into the light by a couple of common thieves. While one division of the CIA was wrestling with cranes the size of buildings to steal nuclear submarines from the crushing darkness of the abyss, another, perhaps less glamorous division was tackling a problem on a much smaller scale. The gargantuan effort of Project Azorian shows the sheer breathtaking scope of the agency's ambition. But to truly understand the Cold War mindset, you have to look at the other end of the spectrum. You have to look at the projects born not of grand engineering, but of desperate lateral thinking. You have to, in other words, talk about the cat. Your new assignment is deceptively simple. You need to record a conversation between 2 foreign dignitaries on a park bench somewhere public where a human agent would be too conspicuous. The Directorate of Science and Technology has been wrestling with this. How do you get a microphone close enough without it being detected? The answer someone proposes in a moment of what was either sheer genius or profound sleep deprivation is to hide the listening device in something that belongs in a park, something that can get close to people without anyone paying it any mind. The answer is a cat. This was the dawn of Project Acoustic Kitty. An authoritative historical fact is that this was a genuine CIA project developed in the 1960s. The plan was as intricate as it was absurd. A veterinary surgeon would perform a complex hour-long operation to implant a tiny microphone in the cat's ear canal, a small radio transmitter at the base of its skull, and a thin wire antenna woven discreetly through its long fur. A small battery would be implanted in its chest. The result would be a living, breathing, purring, four-legged surveillance device capable of sidling up to a sensitive conversation and transmitting it to a nearby agent in a listening van. It's the kind of idea that gets you laughed out of a modern tech startup's boardroom, but in the anything-goes atmosphere of the Cold War, it got enthusiastic approval and a multi-million-dollar budget. Of course, the engineers and surgeons quickly ran into a fundamental design flaw. The flaw wasn't the microphone or the battery or the transmitter. The flaw was the cat. The primary obstacle to Project Acoustic Kitty was the immutable fact that you cannot give orders to a cat. Their only allegiance is to their own comfort and the remote possibility of a sunbeam or a dropped piece of fish. They do not have a strong sense of patriotic duty. You can train a dog to sit, to stay, to attack. A cat will just look at you, blink slowly, and wander off to take a nap in a more comfortable spot. The project team spent years trying to overcome this. They worked to train the cat to respond to certain cues to move short distances toward a target. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the declassified project documents reveal that the surgeons encountered a significant and unforeseen problem: the cat would get hungry. This basic biological drive would often override any training, causing the cybernetically enhanced feline to abandon its mission in search of a snack. The scientists had to wrestle with the problem of how to power their sophisticated listening device without interfering with the cat's fundamental need to find food. It was a perfect tiny metaphor for the entire Cold War, a clash between brilliant complex technology and messy, unpredictable nature. After 5 years of research and development, and an estimated cost of around $20 million, Acoustic Kitty was finally ready for its first field test. You are part of the team sitting in an unmarked van parked across the street from a park in Washington, D.C. Your target is a pair of men sitting on a bench just outside a foreign compound. Your high-tech asset, the culmination of years of work, is ready. An agent gently opens the side door of the van and places the cat on the pavement. The hopes of the entire project rest on its furry shoulders. The cat takes a few steps out of the van, pauses to look around at the new and interesting environment, takes a few more steps toward the street, and is immediately and unceremoniously struck and killed by a passing taxicab. The mission, which had been 5 years in the making, lasted approximately 30 seconds. It gathered no intelligence on foreign dignitaries, but did provide a stark, if expensive, lesson in feline road safety. In the stunned silence of the van, the project was declared a failure on the spot. A later internal memo would dryly conclude that the program was not practical for their highly specialized needs. Historians still debate whether the project represents a pinnacle of out-of-the-box thinking during the Cold War's technological frenzy, or if it's simply definitive proof that when you give a secret agency a virtually unlimited budget and a mandate to stop communism, some truly spectacularly weird ideas are going to get funded. The story of Acoustic Kitty is a vital reminder that for every audacious high-stakes success like the U-2 or partial success like Project Azorian, there were dozens of quiet, absurd failures. It shows that the Shadow War was not always a grim and serious affair. Sometimes it was just plain ridiculous. And it's a good thing to remember that as we now turn to a moment when the stakes were at their absolute highest, when the world held its breath, and when failure was not a ridiculous option, but an apocalyptic one. It is a very long way from the comic tragedy of a spy cat being flattened by a taxi to the cold, paralyzing terror of global nuclear annihilation. The failure of Project Acoustic Kitty was the failure of a silly idea. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 was the potential failure of the entire human experiment. After years of shadowy operations, back-alley deals, and technological one-upmanship, the Cold War's secret machinations finally broke out into the open, pushing the world to the very brink of the abyss. For 13 days, everything stopped. You are in the cabinet room of the White House. The air is thick with tension and cigar smoke. Grainy black and white photographs are spread across the long table. They are the latest images from a U-2 spy plane, and they show without a shadow of a doubt that the Soviet Union is placing medium-range nuclear ballistic missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. They are pointed directly at every major city on the American East Coast. The game has changed completely and terrifyingly. Your world shrinks to this one room. For nearly 2 weeks, you and a small group of advisors, the Executive Committee or EXCOM, are locked in a permanent state of crisis. The taste of stale coffee is constant. Sleep is a forgotten luxury. You can feel the immense, crushing weight of the decision-making process. The military brass, as they so often do, have a simple and direct plan: immediate airstrikes on the missile sites, followed by a full-scale invasion of Cuba. It's a clean, aggressive solution that has the minor, unfortunate side effect of almost certainly triggering a full-scale nuclear war with the Soviet Union, a war that would kill hundreds of millions of people. President John F. Kennedy thankfully looks for another path. He opts for a naval quarantine around Cuba, a blockade in everything but, name a careful legal distinction, to avoid an official act of war. It's a friendlier, more clinical term for pointing the entire U.S. Navy at the island and telling the Soviets not to cross the line. For days, the world watches as Soviet ships loaded with more missiles and equipment steam toward that line. This is the public story, a global game of chicken with two nuclear-armed superpowers locked in an unblinking stare-down. It appears to be a contest of pure will, but behind the scenes, a second more desperate and far more important conversation is taking place. It is a frantic secret search for a way out a ladder that both Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev can climb down without looking weak. And this back-channel communication is at times terrifyingly improvised. For a quirky or off-topic fact, one of the most crucial links in this secret dialogue was not a diplomat, but an ABC News reporter named John Scaly. He was approached by a senior KGB official, Alexander Fomin, at a Washington restaurant and was used as an informal intermediary to float potential deals and gauge the White House's reaction. For a few terrifying days, the fate of the world depended in part on a journalist correctly relaying messages between a spy and the president's inner circle. The public resolution to the crisis, when it finally comes, seems like a clear victory for the United States. Khrushchev announces over public radio that the Soviet Union will dismantle the missiles in Cuba and ship them home. In return, the United States publicly pledges that it will never invade Cuba. The world breathes a collective, shuddering sigh of relief. American strength and resolve, it seems, have forced the Soviets to back down. But that is not the whole story. You were in the room for the real deal, the secret deal, the one that could never be admitted to the public or to America's allies. An authoritative historical fact is that the agreement hinged on a secret component, a crucial concession delivered orally by Attorney General Robert Kennedy to the Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. The United States secretly agreed that at a later date it would quietly remove its own Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey. These missiles were on the Soviet Union's border, just as threatening to Moscow as the Cuban missiles were to Washington. This secret trade was the true key to peace. It allowed Khrushchev to tell his own inner circle that he had also won, that he had traded his missiles in Cuba for the American missiles in Turkey. Historians still debate whether the Jupiter missiles in Turkey were genuinely obsolete and scheduled for removal anyway, as the Kennedy administration later claimed to preserve the image of a clean, unyielding victory, or if they were still a potent strategic asset whose removal constituted a significant, though secret, concession. What you know for sure is that the public story of unbending strength was a necessary fiction. The secret reality of pragmatic compromise is what saved the world. You are left with the chilling knowledge of just how close you came, and the understanding that the most important words spoken during the crisis were never written down and never officially acknowledged. The experience prompts the creation of a new direct secure link, the famous Moscow-Washington hotline, to ensure that future leaders won't have to rely on journalists in restaurants to prevent Armageddon. But the need for other, more clandestine forms of communication for messages that could be sent to agents in the field without ever being traced remained as strong as ever. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended with the quiet click of a phone being placed back in its cradle and a secret promise between two powerful men. The world had pulled back from the brink, and a new official channel was established to make sure it never got that close again, the Moscow-Washington hotline. A direct, secure line for presidents and premiers. But the Cold War wasn't fought by presidents alone. It was fought by the lonely, anonymous figures on the ground, the agents and moles living under false names in hostile cities. You can't use the hotline to tell your spy in Vienna that his cover is about to be blown. For that, you need something else. You need a whisper on the wind. You need a ghost. Imagine you are in a dimly lit room late at night. The only light comes from the soft amber glow of a shortwave radio dial. You turn the knob slowly, carefully navigating the strange and wonderful chaos of the airwaves. The shortwave band is a hidden world. In between bursts of static, you can hear the faint, ethereal sounds of a polka from Poland, a formal news broadcast from Beijing, the coded chatter of ships' captains crossing the Atlantic. You are an invisible tourist drifting through the world's hidden conversations. You keep turning the dial past the loud, clear signals of the major state broadcasters, and you search for the quieter, stranger things that live in the static between them. And then you find one. It starts with a piece of music, often something jarringly out of place. It might be a snippet of a jaunty English folk tune or a few bars of a Swedish waltz, or just a series of electronic pips playing over and over. It is an interval signal, a call to attention. Then, as suddenly as it began, the music stops. A voice emerges from the hiss. Sometimes it's a woman with a crisp British accent. Sometimes it's a man speaking stern German. Sometimes, most unsettlingly, it is the flat, synthesized voice of an early text-to-speech program or even a child. The voice does not tell a story. It reads numbers. 5, 9, 7, 3, 0. Group after group of 5-digit numbers read in a dead, monotonous rhythm for minutes on end. Then the numbers stop, the music may or may not play one last time, and the station vanishes, dissolving back into the static as if it were never there. You have just stumbled upon a numbers station. An authoritative historical fact is that these shortwave stations of officially unknown origin are widely understood to be a method for sending coded one-way messages to intelligence agents in the field. The spy is told what frequency to listen to and at what time. They use a simple portable shortwave receiver to listen to the broadcast and write down the sequence of numbers. Then they take out their one-time pad, a tiny, easily destructible booklet of random cryptographic keys, and apply the key for that day's message. The result is a perfectly secure, completely untraceable, and utterly deniable communication. The message itself is for one person only. To everyone else, it is just meaningless noise. For decades, radio hobbyists and intelligence agencies have tracked these bizarre broadcasts, giving them affectionate and spooky nicknames based on their interval signals. For a quirky or off-topic fact, one of the most famous and long-running stations was nicknamed the Lincolnshire Poacher by listeners. It used the first 2 bars of that cheerful English folk song as its call sign, followed by a very prim female voice reading number groups. It was eventually confirmed after the Cold War to have been an operation of the British Secret Intelligence Service MI6, likely broadcasting from a military base in Cyprus to agents in the Middle East. It's a wonderful bit of irony. A broadcast meant to be the height of secrecy became a beloved catch for hobbyists all over the globe. Historians and intelligence analysts still debate the exact purpose and origin of some of the more unusual stations. The sheer variety is baffling. Were they all for spies, Or could some have been used for other clandestine purposes, like communicating with special forces units, drug smugglers, or even as a so-called dead man's switch for a doomsday device broadcasting continuously until it stops, with the silence itself being the final terrifying message? The mystery is the point. Their power lies in their anonymity. You can't jam a broadcast if you're not sure who it's for or what it means. You can't bomb a transmitter if you can't find it. Imagine the spy on the other end. Huddled in a cold water flat in Prague, the antenna of their small radio dangling out the window, they listen with an intensity you can't fathom. Every number is a matter of life and death. The string of digits could be a set of coordinates for a dead drop, a warning about a compromised colleague, or an order to assassinate a target. Or, for all we know, it could be a stern message from headquarters about the proper way to file expense reports. That's the beauty of it. No one but the intended recipient will ever know. You turn the dial on your radio. The frequency is silent again. The ghost has departed. You are left alone in your room with the hiss of the empty airwaves and the chilling knowledge that you have just accidentally listened in on the secret mail system of the entire world, a conversation between a shadow and a ghost, written in a language made of numbers. Listening to ghosts on the radio is one thing. It's a passive art. You hear the whisper, you feel the chill of the secret world, but you are ultimately just an observer. The next great leap in the Shadow War was far more ambitious. It was a plan not just to listen to your enemy, but to write his diary for him. It was a scheme based on a simple, devastating premise. What if you could control the very secrets your adversary works so hard to steal? What if you could poison their well of knowledge not with toxins, but with truth-like lies? You are sitting in a secure office not in Washington, but in Paris, at the headquarters of the French counterintelligence service, the DST. The problem laid out before you is a familiar one. The Soviet Union, for all its military might, is technologically backward. Their computers are clunky, their manufacturing is inefficient, their oil and gas technology is decades behind. Their solution to this problem for years has been a simple one: theft. Their research and development program often consisted of a man in a trench coat with a miniature camera, or a friendly diplomat with an open briefcase at a trade show. They ran a massive global operation to hoover up every piece of Western technology they could get their hands on. And then, in 1981, a miracle lands on your desk. A disgruntled high-level KGB officer named Vladimir Vetrov, codenamed Farewell by the French, decides he has had enough of the corrupt Soviet system. He walks into your embassy and becomes one of the most important defectors of the Cold War. An authoritative historical fact is that the documents Vetrov provided, which became known as the Farewell dossier, gave Western intelligence a complete top-to-bottom blueprint of the KGB's technology theft program known as Line X. The dossier included a shopping list of desired technologies, the names of front companies, and most importantly, a list of hundreds of active Soviet agents and the Western contacts who were feeding them information. Your first instinct is to use this list to round up every spy to shatter their network in one fell swoop. But then a far more subtle, more cunning, and ultimately more destructive plan begins to form. What if you don't stop them? What if instead you help them? You now have their entire shopping list, so you decide to give them exactly what they're looking for. Except the version you give them will be special. It will be a Trojan horse. The plan is so audacious it requires international cooperation at the highest level. In a truly quirky or off-topic fact, the intelligence was considered so vital that French President François Mitterrand personally briefed U.S. President Ronald Reagan on the Farewell dossier during an Ottawa G7 summit in 1981, forging a new era of trust between the two nations' intelligence services. The CIA was brought in, and a massive coordinated counterintelligence program began. The execution is a masterpiece of deception. You identify a known Line X agent who is trying to acquire, for example, the designs for a new sophisticated American radar system. You don't block him. You make sure a friendly, corruptible source provides him with the blueprints. But the blueprints you provide have a tiny, almost undetectable flaw in the circuitry. You learn the Soviets are trying to get the formula for a new stealth coating for their aircraft. You ensure they get a version of the formula that degrades rapidly under certain atmospheric conditions. You allow them to steal advanced computer chips that have been specially designed to work perfectly for a few hundred hours, and then fail randomly and catastrophically. The chips were designed to pass all initial tests only to crumble when they were most needed. It was a feature, not a bug from your perspective. The crown jewel of this entire operation targeted the jewel of the Soviet economy, a massive new trans-Siberian gas pipeline they were building to carry natural gas to Western Europe. To run such a huge pipeline, you need complex automated control software for the pumps, turbines, and valves. The Soviets naturally set out to acquire the best software they could, which at the time came from a Canadian company. Through their network, they successfully stole it. Or rather, they were handed a special version courtesy of the CIA. This software was programmed to work flawlessly for a time before going quietly, beautifully, catastrophically insane. In the summer of 1982, deep in the desolate wilderness of Siberia, the doctored software did its job. It went haywire, resetting pump speeds and valve settings to produce pressures far beyond what the pipeline could handle. The result was the most monumental non-nuclear explosion and fire ever seen from space. Historians and former intelligence officials still debate the exact cause of the 1982 Trans-Siberian pipeline explosion. Was it a direct and deliberate result of the CIA's sabotaged software, a story later championed by Reagan-era officials like Thomas Reed? Or was it simply a spectacular example of shoddy Soviet engineering and poor safety standards, an accident that the CIA was more than happy to claim as a victory? The truth remains shrouded in the Siberian snow and layers of official denial. What is certain is that the farewell dossier operation was a quiet, crippling blow. It was a virus inserted into the Soviet technological bloodstream. It bred a deep and lasting paranoia within their system. Every stolen blueprint, every acquired microchip, every piece of foreign machinery was now suspect. The program designed to close the technology gap only widened it, leaving them with failing factories, malfunctioning military hardware, and a profound distrust of their own hard-won secrets. You had turned their greatest intelligence strength into their greatest vulnerability. The farewell dossier was a masterpiece of technological sabotage, a quiet, brilliant blow that crippled the Soviet industrial machine from the inside. It was a victory for the West, a perfect example of turning an enemy's hunger for information against them. But it would be a grave mistake to think this kind of information warfare was a one-way street. While the CIA was learning how to corrupt computer chips, the Soviet Union had long since mastered the art of corrupting something far more powerful and vulnerable: reality itself. They had a name for it: aktivnie meropriyatia, active measures. This wasn't simple propaganda, the kind with cheerful posters of smiling tractor drivers. Active measures were darker, more insidious. It was the art of using information as a weapon, of weaving a thread of falsehood so skillfully into the fabric of public discourse that people wouldn't even notice it was there. The goal wasn't always to make you believe a lie. Often the goal was simply to make you doubt the truth. It was a sustained campaign to erode trust in Western governments, to sow discord among allies, and to paint the United States as a malevolent, destructive force in the world. It was psychological warfare on a global scale. You are sitting in your living room in the 1980s reading a newspaper or a magazine. You come across a small but interesting story, perhaps, from a foreign correspondent citing a report from a little-known scientific journal in another country. The story suggests a disturbing possibility, a conspiracy, a hidden truth. You read it, You might discuss it with a friend, and a tiny seed of doubt is planted in your mind. What you don't know is that the entire chain of information, the foreign correspondent, the scientific report, the expert it quotes, was fabricated from whole cloth in Moscow by a special department of the KGB. An authoritative historical fact is that one of the most successful and infamous of these campaigns was codenamed Operation Infection. This was a sophisticated multi-year KGB effort to spread the false rumor that the AIDS virus was not a naturally occurring disease, but a biological weapon invented by the U.S. military at its laboratories in Fort Detrick, Maryland. The KGB didn't try to plant this story in the New York Times. They started small. In 1983, they planted the story in a pro-Soviet newspaper in India. Then Soviet media began quoting the Indian newspaper. Soon, other newspapers around the world were quoting the Soviet media. It was the slow, handcrafted analog version of making a lie go viral, nurturing it from a whisper in a small publication into a global roar. The story became so widespread that it is still believed by some to this day. The Soviets were masters of the political forgery, creating documents that appeared to expose the darkest secrets of the West. For a quirky or off-topic fact, their craftsmen became so skilled that they could convincingly fake the handwriting and signatures of world leaders. In one famous case, they forged a racist letter supposedly from the Ku Klux Klan and sent it to the Olympic committees of several African nations, threatening their athletes if they attended the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. The goal was to encourage a boycott and embarrass the United States on the world stage. It was crude, but often surprisingly effective. They were in essence the original internet trolls, but with the full backing of a nuclear-armed state. Intelligence analysts still debate the ultimate strategic effectiveness of these active measures. Did the AIDS disinformation campaign or a forged letter from the KKK actually change any government's foreign policy? Probably not. But that may not have been the point. Did it make millions of people around the world, particularly in Africa, Asia, and South America, more suspicious of the United States? Did it erode America's moral standing and make it harder to win hearts and minds? Absolutely. The goal wasn't always a knockout punch. Often it was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a slow poisoning of the global conversation. The great asymmetry of this conflict was that the Soviets were weaponizing the West's greatest strength, its freedom. In a closed society like the USSR, the state could easily squash a rumor. But in the West, with its free press and its inherent distrust of government, a juicy conspiracy theory, no matter how outlandish, could find fertile ground, take root, and grow. The KGB didn't have to convince everyone. They just had to convince a few, and the mechanics of a free society would do the rest. So you put down your magazine, that little seed of doubt planted. The story about the military lab lingers in your mind. It seems plausible. It fits with a general sense of unease you have about the powers that be. You don't realize it, but your own thoughts have just become a tiny, insignificant battlefield in the Cold War. The fight for hearts and minds was not always about grand ideologies, but sometimes about these small, targeted acts of informational sabotage. And as both sides sought any advantage they could, some in the West began to wonder if there were other, even stranger avenues to explore in the war for the mind. If the Soviets could bend reality, perhaps it was time to explore things beyond reality altogether. The KGB's active measures were a form of mental warfare designed to bend reality, to make you question the very information you consumed. It was a sophisticated external attack on the Western psyche. Faced with an enemy that seemed capable of manipulating the truth so effectively, some in the American intelligence community began to wonder if they needed to look inward to explore the hidden potential of the human mind itself. If the Cold War was a battle for reality, perhaps it was time to recruit soldiers from a place beyond the conventionally real. You are sitting in a sterile, featureless room. The walls are white. The air is still. There is a simple table and 2 chairs. There are no windows. The room is a sensory deprivation chamber designed to be a blank slate for your mind. You are not a spy in the traditional sense. You are not trained in combat or subterfuge. You are a psychic. Or to use the official, more clinical term, you are a remote viewer. You are part of one of the strangest and most secret programs of the entire Cold War Project Stargate. An authoritative historical fact is that Project Stargate was the code name for a secret U.S. Army program later run by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA that operated from 1978 to 1995. Its purpose was to investigate whether psychic phenomena, specifically the purported ability of remote viewing, could be used to gather intelligence. The theory was simple. Could a gifted individual sitting in a quiet room in Maryland accurately describe a location or event anywhere else in the world just by being given its geographic coordinates? It was the ultimate long-distance reconnaissance, a quiet attempt to turn the human brain into a satellite. The protocol is strict, an attempt to lend scientific rigor to a deeply unscientific feeling process. An officer the monitor sits with you. They hand you a sealed, opaque envelope. Inside is a piece of paper with a set of latitude and longitude coordinates. Neither you nor the monitor knows what the target is. It is a double-blind experiment. Your job is to relax, to clear your mind of all the chatter and noise, and to focus on the coordinates. You have to let your mind go there and simply report what you experience. It's not like watching a movie in your head. The data comes in fragments, a jumble of sensory impressions. You might say, I'm sensing something tall, metallic, cylindrical. There's a feeling of immense energy inside. It's near water. I can smell salt. You sketch what you see in your mind's eye, often just abstract shapes, a curve, a sharp angle, a cross-section. It is a highly structured process of sitting quietly and waiting for your intuition to do something spectacular. It's a form of government-funded meditation with a national security purpose. The results are maddeningly inconsistent. Many sessions produce absolutely nothing of value. A viewer might describe a forest when the target is a dessert, or spend 10 minutes detailing a pleasant picnic that has no bearing on reality. Sometimes they just seem to describe a really nice sandwich they were thinking about. But then there are the hits. The strange, inexplicable, and often startlingly accurate hits. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the program's most celebrated psychic, Joseph McMoneagle, also known as Remote Viewer 0001, was credited with a series of stunning successes. In one famous session, he was given coordinates for a secret Soviet shipyard and proceeded to sketch a detailed drawing of a massive, previously unknown class of submarine with a double hull and a huge number of missile tubes. When satellites later captured the first images of the new Typhoon-class submarine, his drawing was found to be uncannily accurate. Skeptics and proponents still fiercely debate the results of the Stargate program. Were the handful of documented hits statistically significant proof of psychic phenomena, or were they simply a combination of vague, generalized descriptions, lucky guesses, and a heavy dose of confirmation bias, where intelligence analysts already knowing the answer would retroactively fit the psychic's ambiguous drawings and statements to the known target? A drawing of a big, long building near water can describe an awful lot of things after all. You can just imagine the scene at the Pentagon. A grizzled Air Force general waiting for intelligence on a new Soviet bomber is handed a report from Project Stargate. It contains a drawing of what looks like a lopsided seagull and a note that says, "The target feels cold and sounds like humming." It was an unconventional source of intelligence, to say the least. The Stargate program continued in deep secrecy for nearly 20 years, a quiet testament to the Cold War's central rule: no potential advantage, no matter how strange, could be left unexplored. It was a war fought on every conceivable front, from the ocean floor to the edge of space, and for a brief and bizarre time, into the theoretical dimensions of psychic power. The program was finally terminated in 1995 after a CIA review concluded that it had never provided any valuable, actionable intelligence. The file was closed. The quest to weaponize the paranormal was over. But the very existence of such a program reveals the true depth of the era's paranoia, a time when even the most rational of military planners were willing to take a chance on a ghost. The quiet, strange journey into the paranormal with Project Stargate ultimately ended with a closed file and a shrug. It was an esoteric dead end. But while the American intelligence community was exploring the fuzzy edges of human consciousness, its primary adversary, the Soviet Union, was honing a secret weapon that was anything but fuzzy. Soviet military intelligence had a far more direct, more physical, and more brutal approach to problem solving. They weren't interested in remotely viewing their enemies. They were interested in ensuring their enemies ceased to exist. You are not a psychic. You are not a code breaker. You are a weapon. You belong to a brotherhood so secret that its very existence was officially denied by the Soviet government for decades. You are an operator in the Spetsnaz GRU. An authoritative historical fact is that the GRU, the main intelligence directorate, was the Soviet Union's powerful and highly secretive military intelligence agency, a direct and often bitter rival to the more famous KGB. While the KGB handled political security and foreign espionage, the GRU handled the military side of things, and its elite special forces, the Spetsnaz, were the tip of that deadly spear trained for sabotage and direct action deep behind enemy lines. Your training is the stuff of nightmares designed to systematically dismantle your fear and hesitation, reforging you into an instrument of the state. For a quirky, or rather horrifyingly on-topic fact, a key part of this process was the psychologiskaya polosa, or psychological strip. This wasn't a normal obstacle course. It was a purpose-built trench of horrors, a chaotic landscape of barbed wire, roaring fires, and unexpected explosions. You would crawl through this ditch while live ammunition from machine guns cracked just inches above your head. To desensitize you to the gore of battle, the course was often strewn with the blood and viscera of recently slaughtered animals from a nearby abattoir. The goal was to make the chaos of a real battlefield feel like a calm, familiar workplace. Your mission, should the Cold War ever turn hot, is terrifyingly simple. In the hours before the first Soviet tanks would roll into West Germany, you and your small team would already be there. You would have been inserted days or weeks earlier, hiding in deep cover locations waiting. Your targets are not enemy soldiers. Your targets are the nerve endings of the NATO alliance. You would emerge from the shadows to destroy nuclear missile silos, to sever command and control communication lines, to assassinate key political and military leaders, and to seize critical airfields. Subtlety is for the KGB. Your job is to make sure that when the war begins, the enemy's command structure is already deaf, dumb, and blind. You are a scalpel designed for a decapitation strike. Military strategists still debate how effective the Spetsnaz would have been in a full-scale NATO-Warsaw Pact conflict. Were they a genuine war-winning asset capable of paralyzing NATO's response in the first crucial hours? Or would they have been quickly isolated, hunted down, and destroyed, a valiant but ultimately suicidal effort far from any friendly support? But your work isn't limited to a hypothetical World War III. In the long, tense peace of the Cold War, you are the state's most deniable tool for violence. Your colleagues are sent abroad as military advisors training proxy forces in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. They are sent to hunt down high-profile defectors, delivering the Kremlin's final bloody verdict in quiet European suburbs. You are the specialists in what is euphemistically called special tasks or wet work. It is your job to solve problems that cannot be solved with diplomacy or propaganda. There is a fierce rivalry between your agency, the GRU, and the KGB. You view the KGB as political schemers, paper pushers, and talkers who are soft in the field. They in turn view you as blunt instruments thugs who lack their sophisticated understanding of the ideological struggle. They try to win the world over with persuasion and lies. You are trained to win it by ensuring there is no one left to argue with. You sit now in a Spartan barracks room, the air smelling of cleaning oil and cheap tobacco. You are meticulously disassembling and reassembling your firearm, an action you can perform in total darkness. The muscle memory is absolute. You do not deal in the abstract secrets of decrypted messages or psychological profiles. The secrets you handle are physical, the weak point in a perimeter fence, the schedule of a NATO general, the explosive yield of a small custom-made limpet mine. You are the final argument in a political disagreement. While the spies and the diplomats play their complex game of chess, you are the hand that simply reaches out and sweeps all the pieces from the board. You are the secret that kills other secrets. While the GRU was busy forging its Spetsnaz operators into perfect, unquestioning instruments of state violence, a man from within their own ranks was secretly becoming the single most damaging weapon the West had ever deployed against the Soviet Union. He was a decorated colonel in that very same military intelligence agency, a man who had access to the deepest secrets of the Soviet war machine. He was not a reluctant draftee or a low-level clerk. He was an insider, and he had decided with cold determination to burn the entire system to the ground. His name was Oleg Penkovsky. You are a case officer for MI6 stationed in Moscow in the early 1960s. Your life is a monotonous routine of diplomatic cocktail parties and constant low-grade paranoia, always aware of the KGB minder watching from a distance. Then, a British businessman named Greville Wynne, who does some occasional work for you, brings you something extraordinary. He has been approached by a high-ranking GRU colonel. This isn't a vague offer. It's a direct, urgent plea. The colonel wants to spy for the West. This is the moment every intelligence officer dreams of and dreads. Is it real? Or is it an elaborate KGB provocation, a trap designed to expose your network? For a quirky or off-topic fact, Penkovsky was so desperate to make contact that his initial attempts were clumsy and almost comical. He tried passing notes to American students on the street who, terrified of being caught in a KGB sting, promptly threw the notes away. It took months of these ignored pleas before he finally found a willing conduit in Wynne. His desperation, you realize, is genuine. You begin to meet him. In drab hotel rooms in quiet parks during staged business meetings, and the information he provides is beyond anything you could have imagined. He doesn't just offer secrets, he delivers a deluge. He arrives at meetings with a Minox camera, the tiny, brilliant gadget that was the iPhone of 1960s spycraft, and hands over roll after roll of film. He photographs everything, meeting notes from the Politburo GRU operational plans, and most critically, the technical specifications for the Soviet Union's entire missile arsenal. He photographed so many top-secret rocket manuals that he probably knew more about Soviet offensive capabilities than most of the generals on the general staff. The most vital intelligence he ever provided became clear in October of 1962. An authoritative historical fact is that Penkovsky gave the West the complete technical manuals for the SS-4 medium-range ballistic missile. When American U-2s took their fateful photographs of the launch sites in Cuba, your analysts in Washington weren't just looking at mysterious shapes. Because of Penkovsky, they knew exactly what they were seeing. They knew the missile's maximum range, its fuel type, how long it took to prepare for launch, and its probable margin of error. This intimate knowledge was a game changer. It allowed President Kennedy and his advisors to accurately gauge the threat, preventing them from either underestimating it or, just as dangerously, overestimating it and launching a preemptive strike. Penkovsky's betrayal gave Kennedy the confidence to choose the path of the quarantine, pulling the world back from the brink. But why did he do it? What turns a decorated colonel into his country's greatest traitor? Intelligence historians still debate Oleg Penkovsky's true motivations. Was he a genuine ideologue, a man who saw Nikita Khrushchev as a reckless gambler who might actually start a nuclear war and believed he was acting to save the world? Was he a vainglorious egotist, a man who craved the validation and heroism that the West could offer him? Or was he simply a deeply frustrated officer whose brilliant career had stalled a man seeking the ultimate revenge on a system that had passed him over for promotion? The answer is likely a complex cocktail of all three. He wasn't just disillusioned. He was actively and profoundly annoyed, which is often a far more powerful motivator for espionage than any grand ideology. An operation of this magnitude, however, cannot last forever. The KGB, for all its flaws, is not stupid. They begin to notice the leaks. They notice that the Americans seem to know things they shouldn't. Their vast surveillance apparatus begins to focus inward. They notice Penkovsky's frequent meetings with the British businessman. The net slowly tightens. You can feel the change in your meetings with him. His confidence is replaced by a nervous energy, the certainty of his coming arrest. You offer him extraction, a new life in the West, but he refuses, determined to pass along one last roll of film. In October 1962, at the very height of the missile crisis, he had done so much to inform Oleg Penkovsky was arrested. The fire hose of intelligence was shut off. He was publicly tried, denounced as a traitor to the motherland, and executed the following year. His contact Greville Wynne was sentenced to a long term in a Soviet prison. The operation was over. Penkovsky's legacy is a paradox, a traitor who may have saved the world. His capture and that of his Western contact created a new kind of Cold War problem: what to do with captured spies. They were too valuable to simply be left in a foreign prison, setting the stage for a new, highly ritualized and deeply secret form of diplomacy. The execution of Oleg Penkovsky was a grim final statement from the Soviets. But the imprisonment of his British contact Greville Wynne and the earlier capture of the U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers created a new and delicate problem for the West. What do you do when one of your valuable, highly trained assets is captured and left to rot in an enemy prison? You can't launch a rescue mission. You can't demand their release. But it turns out the other side has the same problem. Their master spies, the ones who get caught, are also sitting in your prisons. And so, out of this pragmatic stalemate, a new, deeply secret and highly ritualized form of Cold War diplomacy was born: the spy swap. The stage for this strange theater is almost always the same place. You are standing in the cold, damp air of a Berlin dawn. Before you is a simple steel bridge stretching across the Havel River, connecting the American sector of West Berlin to the city of Potsdam in Soviet-controlled East Germany. This is the Glienicke Bridge. It's not famous for its beauty or its size. It is famous for being the loneliest, most tense place on Earth during certain pre-arranged moments. It is the waiting room between two worlds. An authoritative historical fact is that the Glienicke Bridge became the primary location for East-West spy exchanges, earning it the enduring nickname, the Bridge of Spies. The very first swap, and the one that set the precedent for all the others, occurred here, on a frozen morning, February 10th, 1962. On that day, the downed U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers, whose capture had caused an international crisis, was traded for the convicted KGB master spy William Fischer, better known to the world by his alias, Rudolf Abel. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the bridge's very nature made it the perfect discreet location. Access to it was severely restricted, limited almost exclusively to Allied military personnel and foreign diplomats. No ordinary German citizens from either East or West were allowed to cross. This meant it could be completely sealed off from the public eye in a matter of minutes, creating a sterile, controllable environment for these incredibly sensitive transactions. It was a bridge that connected two cities, but one that almost nobody could use. Your job is simply to be here to watch. You stand with a small silent group of American and British officials on the western end. At the far end of the bridge, barely visible through the thick morning fog, is a similar group of Soviet and East German officials. In the exact center of the bridge is a simple white line painted on the pavement. That line is the border. It is the edge of a universe. The air is still. No one speaks. There's an unwritten etiquette to these things, a gentleman's agreement between mortal enemies. There will be no taunts, no grandstanding, and certainly no small talk about the weather. This is business. Then, the ritual begins. From each end of the bridge, a single figure begins to walk toward the center. These are the men being exchanged. They walk slowly, often with the gaunt, pale look of men who have spent years in harsh prisons. They are shadows of their former selves, the human cost of the secret war walking home. They don't look at the officials on either side. They often don't even look at each other as they pass in the dead center of the bridge. They just keep walking, their footsteps echoing on the pavement until they reach the welcoming arms of their own side. The transaction is complete. One of yours for one of theirs. Diplomatic historians still debate the underlying calculus of these swaps. Were they purely pragmatic body trades based on the perceived value of the agents involved, a simple cost-benefit analysis? Or did they serve a deeper symbolic purpose as a rare, stable channel of communication? A tacit acknowledgement between the CIA and the KGB that there were in fact unwritten rules to their deadly game. The swaps were a signal that for all the ideological hatred, the individual operatives were seen by their own side as assets worth retrieving, professionals who had simply been caught doing their job. The figures have reached their respective ends of the bridge. They are bundled into waiting black cars. The officials turn and walk away. The cars drive off in opposite directions. Within minutes, the Glienicke Bridge is empty again, just a silent strip of steel and asphalt shrouded in the German mist. It is as if nothing happened. You've just witnessed a ghost story, a quiet, formal ceremony where men are passed from one life to another. You've gotten your pilot back. Your captured agent is home. But the very need for this ritual is a direct result of the failure of technology and the risk to human life. To avoid having to trade for captured pilots in the future, the next logical step was obvious: you had to find a way to take the pilot out of the plane altogether. The silent, formal ritual on the Glienicke Bridge was a necessary solution to a messy problem. It was the Cold War's Human Resources Department managing the unfortunate but inevitable outcome of sending men on dangerous missions. But for the strategists back in Washington, the capture of Gary Powers was more than a personnel issue. It was a failure of technology. The U-2 spy plane, once thought to be untouchable, had been touched. The human pilot in the cockpit was now the weakest link in the chain, a potential captive, a bargaining chip, a political liability. The logical next step was clear. If you wanted to see what the other side was doing without risking a pilot, you had to take the pilot out of the plane, and you had to fly higher, much higher. You are now in a clean room in California in the late 1950s. The air is filtered, the light is flat and shadowless, and everyone is dressed in white lint-free gowns. You are an engineer working on a problem that is, by the standards of the day, impossible. Your task is to build a camera, launch it into orbit on top of a rocket, have it take pictures of the Soviet Union from more than 100 miles up, and then somehow get the film back to Earth so it can be developed. There are no digital signals, no data links. You have to physically retrieve a canister of film dropped from space. This was the secret beginning of satellite reconnaissance, the Corona program. An authoritative historical fact is that the Corona program, which ran from 1959 to 1972, was the world's first successful photographic reconnaissance satellite program. It was a joint project of the CIA and the U.S. Air Force. The satellites designated with the code name Keyhole were designed to orbit the Earth, taking thousands of feet of high-resolution film and then eject that film in a special re-entry capsule. To the public, however, the program didn't exist. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the early Corona launches were publicly disguised as a scientific space program called Discoverer. The official story was that these satellites were conducting space research, testing new technologies, and studying the effects of spaceflight on biological specimens. To sell this lie, some of the early test flights even carried mice, monkeys, and other biological samples, all as elaborate window dressing for the program's true secret purpose. The first year is a string of heartbreaking and incredibly expensive failures. The first dozen launches are a catalog of disaster. Rockets explode on the launch pad. Satellites fail to achieve orbit. In one case, the satellite actually achieved a polar orbit but flew upside down its camera, taking beautiful high-resolution and deeply unhelpful photographs of empty space. The first few attempts mostly just succeeded in filming the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in exquisite detail. The biggest challenge is getting the film back. The solution your team devises is both brilliant and borderline insane. The satellite would eject the film canister in a special capsule called a satellite recovery vehicle, or more casually, a film bucket. This bucket, protected by a heat shield, would plummet back through the atmosphere, then deploy a parachute to slow its descent over a designated recovery zone in the Pacific Ocean. The next step is where it gets truly wild. A specially equipped C-119 flying boxcar aircraft would then have to find this tiny capsule dangling from its parachute and snag it in midair with a system of trailing hooks. It was a perfectly simple plan. Just drop a bucket of film from outer space and have an airplane catch it. What could possibly go wrong? For 13 straight missions, something went wrong. But then, on August 18, 1960, everything worked. Discoverer 14 successfully orbited the Earth, took its pictures, ejected its film bucket, and a C-119 aircraft on its third pass snagged the parachute. The film was recovered. Back at the lab, when the first images were developed, they were a revelation. They were grainy, distorted, and streaked, but they were photographs of Soviet airfields taken from space. For the first time, you had a reliable, repeatable, and safe way of mapping the entire Soviet Union. The impact was immediate and profound. The Corona satellites flew over 100 successful missions, photographing more of the Soviet Union in a single mission than all of the U-2 flights combined. They definitively proved that the much-feared missile gap was a myth. In fact, the United States had a massive strategic advantage. This hard photographic intelligence allowed American presidents to act with more confidence and less paranoia, arguably stabilizing the arms race. Historians of science and technology still debate the long-term impact of Corona's success. Did it create an over-reliance on technical intelligence at the expense of human spies on the ground, leading to a different, more detached kind of strategic blindness down the road? The program remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War, a silent orbital eye that watched over the world. But even as these incredible machines were clicking away in the cold vacuum of space, the old war of secrets continued on the ground. Spies still had to meet agents, still had to trade information, and they still had to rely on the clever and often deadly tools of their trade. The Corona satellites gave the United States an almost godlike view of the world, a silent orbital eye that could map every secret military base and missile silo from the safety of space. It was a revolution in intelligence gathering, but a satellite, for all its power, cannot listen to a whispered conversation in a Moscow cafe. It cannot photograph documents in a locked safe, and it certainly cannot pass a roll of microfilm to a waiting contact. For that, you still needed the human element. You needed spies on the ground, and a spy on the ground surrounded by enemies needs tools. They need gadgets. You are not a field agent. You are not a pilot or a codebreaker. You are an artist of a sort. Your workshop, hidden deep inside CIA or KGB headquarters, is a place where the mundane is made magical and the harmless is made lethal. You are a gadget maker, a real-life Q, and your job is to build the impossible tools for an invisible war. Your work is to give your agents a secret advantage hidden in plain sight. Let's start with the basics: concealment. Your agent needs to move a tiny piece of microfilm containing photographed documents across a border. A pocket is too obvious. So you take a coin, a simple American $50, and you meticulously hollow it out, creating a secret compartment so perfectly fitted that it is undetectable to the naked eye. It's the 1960s version of a password-protected USB drive capable of carrying a nation's secrets. You hollow out the heels of shoes to hide radio transmitters. You design fountain pens that can hold a tightly rolled piece of paper. Your specialty is making the everyday object extraordinary. Then there is surveillance. You craft a tiny camera, a marvel of miniaturization, and hide it behind the knot of a man's tie or inside a woman's brooch. You build a microphone so small it can be placed inside a martini olive left behind on the bar to record a conversation. The briefcase with a hidden camera that takes a picture when the agent presses the latch is a classic. The shoe with the hidden transmitter in the heel was a brilliant innovation, unless, of course, the agent had to go through one of the era's rare but deeply awkward metal detectors. And then there is the darker side of your workshop: the wet work gadgets. The tools not for gathering secrets, but for silencing people. An authoritative historical fact is that one of the most infamous and chilling examples of this technology was used in London in 1978. Georgy Markov, a Bulgarian dissident writer, was walking across Waterloo Bridge when he felt a sharp sting in his thigh. He turned to see a man pick up a dropped umbrella and hurry away. Markov fell ill and died 4 days later. The autopsy revealed a tiny platinum iridium pellet embedded in his leg, a pellet with 2 minuscule holes drilled into it, designed to hold a lethal dose of ricin poison. The pellet had been fired from a specially modified umbrella, a device created by the KGB for its sister service, the Bulgarian secret police. It was a quiet, elegant, and utterly terrifying assassination. You could also get a fountain pen that fired a tiny silent dart of poison, perfect for signing a treaty or for a more permanent kind of contract termination. Not all the gadgets were so sinister. Some were just brilliantly clever. For a quirky or off-topic fact, consider the spy rock. It was exactly what it sounds like. The CIA's Technical Services Department would find a rock from a specific location, say a park in Moscow, and then create a perfect hollow replica out of a plastic composite complete with dirt and moss for authenticity. Inside this fake rock, they would place a listening device or a communications package. An agent could then swap the real rock for the fake one, allowing them to leave a dead drop or a listening post in plain sight, hidden by its own sheer mundanity. Curators at spy museums and historians of espionage still debate how many of these ingenious gadgets were truly effective in the field versus how many were simply clever but impractical prototypes. Was the infamous lipstick pistol ever actually used to shoot someone, or was it more of a proof of concept to show what was possible? The line between the practical and the theatrical was often blurry. You sit at your workbench putting the finishing touches on a new hollow coin. The precision required is immense. It is a perfect little machine of deception. These tools were the secret weapons of the Cold War's foot soldiers, the talismans, that allowed them to operate in a world of constant suspicion. They are also symbols of the era's profound paranoia. You needed a poison-tipped umbrella because a simple handshake could be a death sentence. You needed a hollow coin because a sealed envelope could be a trap. Every object, every person was potentially not what it seemed. This pervasive, suffocating atmosphere of distrust created an immense psychological pressure, a pressure that could lead even the most rational people to make catastrophic mistakes, not just in the field, but in the nuclear missile silos themselves. The world of the Cold War spy was a universe of carefully engineered paranoia. Every object could be a weapon, every friendly face, a mask, every conversation a potential trap. This pervasive, corrosive suspicion was not just confined to agents in the field. It seeped upwards into the very highest levels of military and political command. In such a poisoned atmosphere, the line between a gesture of strength and an act of aggression, between a training exercise and a declaration of war, can become terrifyingly, almost invisibly thin. In November of 1983, that line was nearly erased forever. You are sitting at a console in a concrete bunker buried deep underground somewhere in the Soviet Union. You are an intelligence analyst for the GRU. Your job is to monitor the military activities of the NATO alliance. For the past few days, you've been watching them conduct their annual autumn command exercise. It's called Able Archer. Usually, these drills are routine, predictable affairs. But this year, something is different. Something is deeply wrong. The political climate is already at a fever pitch. U.S. President Ronald Reagan has recently labeled your country the evil empire. The Soviet military has shot down a civilian airliner, Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing everyone aboard. The rhetoric is not friendly. And now, this exercise. An authoritative historical fact is that Able Archer 83 was a NATO command post drill of unprecedented realism. It simulated the entire process of escalating from conventional warfare to a full-scale coordinated nuclear attack. To make it as realistic as possible, the exercise involved new, unique encryption codes that you've never seen before. It involved periods of complete radio silence, mimicking a real pre-attack posture. Most terrifyingly, it involved the physical movement of personnel. You are seeing reports that heads of state, including possibly the U.S. President and British Prime Minister, are participating, practicing their wartime relocation procedures. From your seat in this bunker, you are watching NATO tick every single box on your checklist for a genuine surprise nuclear first strike. The data streams across your screen. Each new piece of information, another jolt of adrenaline. NATO's alert status, which normally sits at DEFCON 5, begins to climb. 4, 3, 2. Then you see the message that makes the blood in your veins run cold. As part of the exercise, NATO forces have simulated a move to DEFCON 1, the final state of maximum readiness before war. B-52 bombers at bases in the UK are being moved onto the runways and loaded with what appear to be real nuclear weapons, not concrete dummies. Your superiors are beginning to panic. The raw data is sent up the chain of command all the way to the top of the KGB and the Politburo, and their interpretation is grim. They are convinced that the exercise is a deception, a cover for a real attack. The Soviet nuclear forces are placed on their highest ever alert. In East Germany and Poland, fighter bombers are armed with atomic bombs. Their pilots are ordered into their cockpits to await the final command. Deep in their silos, the crews manning the intercontinental ballistic missiles begin the final launch preparations. The vast, terrifying, world-ending machinery of Soviet retaliation is spooled up and made ready. The system is working exactly as it was designed to. It is responding to a perceived threat with a reciprocal escalation. The problem is, the threat is an illusion. The West, for its part, is largely oblivious to the panic they are causing. They believe it is just a drill. It was a monumentally realistic drill, but a drill nonetheless. For a quirky or off-topic fact, one of the few channels that alerted the West to the true danger was a high-level mole inside the KGB itself. A British double agent named Oleg Gordievsky, seeing the genuine terror among the Soviet leadership, sent a desperate message to his MI6 handlers. Moscow truly believes this is real. This isn't posturing. You need to stop. Historians and national security analysts still debate just how close the world actually came to nuclear war during Able Archer 83. Was the Soviet response a genuine preparation for a preemptive launch, as some declassified documents suggest? Or was it a more measured, though still deeply panicked increase in readiness that never quite crossed that final irrevocable threshold? Then, after 10 days, the exercise ends. NATO forces stand down and return to their normal alert status. On your screen in the bunker, the terrifying indicators blink out one by one. The crisis is over as quietly and as secretly as it began. The world never knew it had just spent a week teetering on the edge of extinction. The incident deeply shook President Reagan, who was reportedly horrified to learn that his own military's actions could have been so dangerously misinterpreted. It was a sobering lesson in just how easily the logic of deterrence could spiral into accidental annihilation. But the story of the world being saved by a last-minute secret warning from a mole wasn't the only time a single unknown individual stood between the world and the fire. Just a few weeks before Abel Archer, another man in another Soviet bunker had faced that choice alone. The Abel Archer war scare was a secret shared by a handful of high-level officials, a global crisis that unfolded in the silent coded messages between bunkers. The world was saved perhaps by a last-minute warning from a well-placed spy. But just a few weeks earlier, on September 26, 1983, the fate of the world rested not on a network of intelligence, but on the shoulders of a single unknown man making a single terrifying decision in absolute isolation. His story would remain one of the Cold War's deepest and most important secrets for more than a decade. You are Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov of the Soviet Air Defense Forces. It is just past midnight, and you are the duty officer at Serpukhov 15, the secret command center for the Soviet Union's brand new OKO nuclear early warning satellite system. It's supposed to be a quiet night. The OKO system is the pride of Soviet technology, a necklace of satellites in high orbit designed to give you the first critical warning of a nuclear missile launch from the United States. It is also, as you know, all too well, a system that is still new, still buggy. It was rushed into service, and everyone trusts it about as far as they can throw it. Suddenly, the silence of the bunker is shattered by a piercing siren. On the large screen in front of you, a map of the United States illuminates with a single stark red word: launch. The system is reporting with the highest possible level of confidence that a single intercontinental ballistic missile has been launched from a base in America and is heading toward the Soviet Union. The room freezes. Then, before anyone can even process the information, the system updates. A second launch, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. 5 Minuteman missiles are in the air. Your job in this exact moment is brutally, terrifyingly simple. You are not meant to think or to feel or to have a gut instinct. You are a cog in a vast automated machine of retaliation. The protocol, which you have drilled 100 times, is clear. You verify the alert on your various systems, and you immediately pass the warning up the chain of command to your superiors, who will then inform the General Staff and the Politburo. From that moment, the Soviet leadership will have perhaps 10 to 15 minutes to decide whether to launch an all-out retaliatory strike. Your report is the first domino. It is the trigger for the end of the world. And the procedure has no room for doubt. It is a very efficient workflow. But you hesitate. Every screen is flashing red. Every alarm is screaming. The 50 people in the room are staring at you, waiting for you to make the call. And something feels profoundly wrong. 5 missiles. A real American first strike wouldn't be 5 missiles. It would be a decapitation blow, a massive, overwhelming launch of hundreds, even thousands of missiles designed to wipe out your entire command structure in a single fiery instant. 5 missiles makes no sense. It's like someone starting a fist fight by politely flicking you on the ear. An authoritative historical fact is that on this night, Stanislav Petrov was faced with this exact scenario. With the early warning system unequivocally reporting an incoming American strike, he chose to disobey his standing orders. He had to make a choice between the computer's logic and his own. Military analysts and psychologists still debate the factors behind Petrov's fateful decision. Was it his civilian training as an engineer that made him inherently distrustful of the new complex computer system? Was it a simple logical deduction that the nature of the attack didn't fit any known war plan? Or was it just a powerful, inexplicable gut feeling that the machine was wrong? He picks up the direct line to his superiors. His hand is sweating. He knows what he is supposed to say. But he makes a different choice. He reports the system alarm, but then he adds the fateful world-saving lie. He reports it as a false alarm, a system malfunction. He is not certain. He is terrified. But he is betting the continued existence of human civilization on his hunch. The next 20 minutes are the longest of his life. If he is wrong, the first American warheads will begin to detonate on Soviet soil. The bunker is silent, save for the hum of the machines. The minutes crawl by. 5, 10, 15, 20. Nothing. The horizon remains dark. The satellites were wrong. He was right. It was later determined for a quirky or off-topic fact that the ultimate cause of the near apocalypse was a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds above North Dakota, which the OCO system's rudimentary software misinterpreted as the infrared signature of multiple missile engine plumes. The world was almost ended by a particularly shiny cloud. Petrov was not hailed as a hero. His action was a source of intense embarrassment for the Soviet military. It exposed a catastrophic flaw in their multi-billion-ruble satellite system, and more damningly, it revealed that a Soviet officer had chosen to disobey protocol at the most critical moment imaginable. For saving the world, his reward was a harsh interrogation, a formal reprimand for not filling out the duty logbook correctly during the incident, and a quiet reassignment to a less sensitive post. He was retired early, and his story remained a state secret until after the fall of the Soviet Union. He was the man who saved the world, and the world never knew his name. His secret was kept not just from the West, but from his own people, a perfect example of a state whose power relied on absolute control over its own narrative. The story of Stanislav Petrov is the story of a state keeping a world-altering secret from its people. The fact that one man's quiet disobedience had saved the world was a truth too inconvenient, too revealing of systemic failure to ever be told. This obsession with controlling the narrative was a hallmark of the Soviet system. But in the Soviet Union's most important European satellite state, East Germany, this obsession reached its ultimate and most intimate conclusion. The German Democratic Republic, or GDR, perfected a system where the state didn't just keep secrets from its citizens, it turned its citizens into a vast secret all-seeing eye. You are living in a gray concrete apartment block in Leipzig in the 1970s. The air outside always seems to carry the faint, sharp smell of lignite coal smoke. Life is a series of quiet, orderly routines. You go to your state-assigned job, you stand in line for groceries, you come home. You have learned, as everyone has to be careful. You have learned that walls have ears, and that smiling faces can hide notebooks. The ever-present, unseen guardian of this order is the Ministry for State Security, better known by its terrifyingly simple abbreviation, the Stasi. An authoritative historical fact is that the Stasi was one of the most effective and pervasive intelligence agencies in history. At its peak in the late 1980s, it employed over 91,000 full-time officers. But its true power came from its sprawling secret network of citizen informants, the inoffizielle Mitarbeiter, or unofficial collaborators. It's estimated that the Stasi had as many as $189,000 of these IMs on its payroll at one time or another. That's roughly one informant for every 90 citizens. If you count part-time informers, the ratio could be as high as 1 in 7. They were your bartender, your doctor, your friendly neighbor, your work colleague, your university professor, and sometimes even your own husband or wife. This is the Stasi's true secret. It outsourced its surveillance to the entire population, turning society into a self-policing web of suspicion. You make a cynical joke about the 2-year waiting list for a Trabant car while having a beer with a friend from work. Your friend, a devoted IM, goes home and files a neat typed report on your defeatist attitude. You complain to a kindly older woman in your apartment building that you wish you could travel to the West to see your cousin. She makes a sympathetic noise and then makes a phone call. Everything is noted. Everything goes into your file. They had a file on you, a file on your friends, and probably a file on your dog, just in case it harbored any anti-socialist barking tendencies. The Stasi's obsession with detail was legendary and often veered into the truly bizarre. For a quirky or off-topic fact, consider their library of smells. The Stasi were pioneers in the field of scent profiling. When they interrogated a dissident or a person of interest, they would place a clean cloth on the chair for the person to sit on. After the interview, the cloth, now impregnated with the individual's unique scent, would be sealed in a glass jar and meticulously labeled. They would also secretly break into homes to steal used laundry for the same purpose. The idea was to build a comprehensive scent library that could be used with tracking dogs if a person ever tried to escape or go underground. It is a level of intimate personal violation that is difficult to comprehend. Sociologists and historians still debate the primary motivations of the thousands of ordinary citizens who became Stasi informants. What makes a person spy on their friends? Was it true ideological belief in the workers' paradise of the GDR? Was it coercion or blackmail? Or was it something smaller and more human? The desire for petty perks like a better apartment, the ability to travel, or simply the quiet, intoxicating feeling of holding a secret power over the lives of your neighbors? The Stasi's goal was not always to arrest and imprison. Often they preferred a method called Zersetzung, which translates to decomposition or corrosion. It was a form of psychological warfare, a secret campaign to destroy a person's life from the inside out without them ever knowing for sure who was responsible. They would use their network of informants to spread black market rumors about you at your job until you were fired. They would have an agent seduce your spouse to break up your marriage. They would secretly enter your apartment not to steal anything, but to move a teapot from one shelf to another, or to change the time on your alarm clock. Small, persistent acts designed to make you doubt your own sanity. It was state-sponsored gaslighting on an industrial scale. You sit in your living room, the gray light fading outside. You hear your neighbors moving around in the apartment above. You think about the conversation you had at work today, the joke you told, the opinion you briefly let slip. And you wonder, who heard it? Who wrote it down? In this world, the greatest secret is not a blueprint for a weapon or a military plan. The greatest secret is what you truly think, and everyone around you is a potential spy trying to steal it. This vast, suffocating system of secrets seemed permanent, unbreachable. But even the most monolithic systems of belief can be shattered, and sometimes the crack comes not from the outside, but from a single secret speech uttered from the very heart of the empire itself. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a joyous, chaotic spectacle. It was a party at the end of history, a definitive televised declaration that the Cold War was over. The great ideological struggle that had defined the 20th century seemed to be dissolving in a flurry of champagne rock music and concrete dust. But deep in secret bunkers buried beneath the Ural Mountains and the vast plains of Russia, the Cold War's most terrifying legacy lay sleeping. It was the ultimate secret, a doomsday machine designed for a war that was now supposedly never going to happen. It was a system built to answer one simple, horrifying question. What happens if your enemy launches a perfect first strike and there's no one left alive to push the button? The central fear of the nuclear age was the decapitation strike, A surprise attack so swift and so devastating that it could wipe out the entire political and military leadership of a nation in a matter of minutes. If the General Secretary, the Politburo, and the top generals were all vaporized before they could give the command, how could you guarantee your retaliation? How could you make your deterrent credible? The Soviet Union, deeply paranoid and obsessed with surviving such a scenario, engineered a solution of breathtaking, almost insane logic. They built a machine to take revenge for them after they were already dead. An authoritative historical fact is that this system was called perimeter, but in the West it became known by a much more evocative and chilling nickname, dead hand. It was a fully to semi-automated command and control system designed to function as a failed deadly device. Its purpose was to ensure that even if the entire Soviet leadership was eliminated, the country's nuclear arsenal would still be launched at its enemies. It was a doomsday machine, the logical endpoint of Cold War paranoia, a plot device from a Stanley Kubrick film made terrifyingly real. Here is how it was designed to work. The system lay dormant, but it was connected to a vast network of seismic light and radiation sensors all across the Soviet Union. If these sensors detected the telltale signs of multiple nuclear explosions on Soviet soil, the system would wake up. Step 1 would be complete. It would then automatically try to establish a communications link with the military's general staff. If the link was active, and a human gave the stand-down order, the system would go back to sleep. But if the link was dead, if there was no response from the high command for a set period of time, the system would make a final, chillingly logical deduction: the leadership is gone. We are under catastrophic attack. And then the dead hand would act. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the central computer didn't launch the thousands of missiles directly. That was deemed too risky. Instead, the system's authority passed to a small handful of human officers in a deep, super-hardened underground bunker. If they decided to proceed, their job was to authorize the launch of a single special command rocket. This rocket, flying high over the smoldering remains of the country, would broadcast the launch authorization codes and attack orders directly to every silo-based missile, every mobile launcher, and every strategic bomber left in the Soviet arsenal. It was a flying robotic ghost carrying out the last will and testament of a dead government, ensuring that the world of the living would soon be joining them. You have to admire the sheer nihilistic elegance of the paranoia. You have to be at a very special level of strategic anxiety to not only mistrust your enemy, but to also mistrust the nerve of your own successors. The system was built to bypass any last-minute hesitation, any moment of human doubt or mercy. It was an automated spasm of pure planet-killing revenge. Post-Cold War analysts and Russian officials still debate the exact status and operational readiness of the perimeter system. Was it ever fully armed and active, a loaded gun pointed at the head of the world? Was it quietly deactivated when the Soviet Union fell apart? Or does some modern, updated version of this automated doomsday weapon chillingly still exist today? A forgotten ghost in the Russian military machine. The official answers have always been vague and contradictory. The lingering uncertainty is perhaps now a part of its deterrent power. The dead hand system is the Cold War's darkest and most profound secret. It wasn't a secret kept from the West necessarily. It was a secret weapon whose very credibility depended on the enemy believing it might exist. It was a secret that outlived the state that built it, a doomsday clock that may or may not still be ticking. It represents the final logical madness of a 45-year-long journey into suspicion and fear. The war that this machine was built for never came. The great game, it seemed, was over. But what about the players? What happened to the thousands of spies, moles, analysts, and agents on both sides who had spent their entire lives fighting this secret war? What happens to a spy when the secrets are no longer worth stealing? The dead hand system was the Cold War's logical, terrifying, and final secret, a solution for a war that mercifully was never fought. As the Berlin Wall crumbled and the Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time, a new and unfamiliar quiet settled over the world. The great defining struggle of the 20th century was over. But what happens to the warriors when the war ends? What becomes of the thousands of spies, case officers, moles, and informants on both sides, whose entire lives, whose very identities were forged in the crucible of this secret conflict? Imagine you are a KGB agent, an illegal living under a deep cover identity in a comfortable American suburb. For 20 years, your life has been a meticulous performance. Your neighbors know you as a mild-mannered accountant. Your children were born here. Your mission for years has been to be ready to be in place. And then one day, the country you serve ceases to exist. The coded messages on your shortwave radio stop. The money no longer appears in the prearranged bank account. Your handler misses the rendezvous at the park bench. Your life's purpose has not been fulfilled. It has been dissolved. You are an orphan of a dead nation, a ghost with a fake passport, and a very real mortgage. Or perhaps you are a CIA case officer, a veteran of the Moscow station. Your entire career has been dedicated to one single, all-consuming goal, countering the Soviet threat. You've recruited agents, run dead drops, and lived with the constant threat of discovery and arrest. Now your enemy has vanished. The great adversary is gone. You are reassigned to a new desk tracking something that feels trivial in comparison, like regional trade disputes or narcotics trafficking. The sharp, clear focus of your life, the black and white struggle against the evil empire, has been replaced by a confusing, messy, and far less satisfying gray. It's the quiet, bureaucratic end to a life of high-stakes adventure. For many, the end of the Cold War was not an end to the danger. An authoritative historical fact is that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, a brief and chaotic period of cooperation began. The new cash-strapped Russian government allowed Western intelligence agencies limited access to some of the once impenetrable KGB archives. This was a goldmine for counterintelligence, and it led to a final bitter harvest of traitors who thought they had gotten away with it. Moles who had been operating for decades were suddenly exposed by a single dusty file pulled from a cabinet in the Lubyanka. This is how the CIA's own Aldrich Ames and the FBI's Robert Hansen were finally caught, their long careers of treachery undone by the bookkeeping of a failed state. Some secrets had an even longer tail. For a quirky or off-topic fact, consider the group of deep-cover Russian illegals arrested in quiet American suburbs in 2010. These were not leftover Cold War spies, but a new generation sent by the new Russia to live completely ordinary lives as real estate agents, journalists, and financial planners, slowly integrating themselves into American society. They were playing the same long game as their Soviet predecessors. Their discovery and subsequent trade for captured Western agents was a strange, nostalgic echo of the spy swaps on the Glienicke Bridge, a reminder that the great game, while changed, was not entirely over. It's hard to adjust to civilian life. You might find yourself instinctively checking for a dead drop behind the garden gnome, or trying to recruit the mailman out of sheer habit. Biographers and intelligence historians continue to explore the profound psychological toll on these individuals after their secret war ended. Could a person who lived a life of constant deception, of compartmentalized identities, of looking over their shoulder at every moment, ever truly adjust to the quiet rhythms of a normal, peaceful existence? How do you tell your family that the man they knew as their father was in fact someone else entirely? How do you unlearn a lifetime of paranoia? And then there were the ones who were never caught. The deep cover moles who retired before the archives were opened. The case officers who quietly left the service. The informants who simply melted back into the population. They are the true ghosts of the Cold War, living out their days in quiet anonymity. That friendly old man down the street, the one who wins the local gardening award for his prize-winning roses every year, might just have a medal for Hero of the Soviet Union, tucked away in a box in his attic. He is a living secret, his past known to no one. The war is over. The secrets are fading. And the players, one by one, are slowly leaving the stage. The spies, for the most part, have gone home. The great bipolar struggle has dissolved, leaving behind a complex and messy world. The files are gathering dust, the agents are collecting their pensions, and the Cold War has receded into the sepia-toned pages of history. But the secrets did not simply vanish when the wall came down. They left behind ghosts, echoes, and infrastructure that quietly shape the world you live in today. The secret war may be over, but you are living in the house that it built. You are sitting in a comfortable room, perhaps listening to this on a device that fits in the palm of your hand. That device connects you to a global network of information, can pinpoint your location anywhere on the planet, and is powered by a microprocessor of unimaginable complexity. An authoritative historical fact is that almost every one of those core technologies is a direct descendant of a top-secret Cold War project. The Internet began its life as ARPANET, a decentralized military communications network designed to survive a nuclear attack. The GPS in your phone that helps you find the nearest coffee shop is the child of the Transit and Navstar satellite systems, created to guide nuclear submarines and ballistic missiles. The miniaturization of electronics, the development of new materials, the very logic of our digital world, so much of it was forged in the secret high-stakes technological race between two superpowers. The Stasi, with their armies of informants and their meticulous handwritten files, would have wept with joy at the sight of modern social media. They spent billions of dollars and decades of effort to build a surveillance system that modern citizens now voluntarily build for themselves. We dutifully upload photographs of ourselves, list our friends and associates, check in at our locations, and announce our political opinions to the entire world. The dream of the secret police, a comprehensive, searchable, cross-reference dossier on every single citizen, has been realized, not through coercion, but through convenience. We have all become our own unofficial informants. The paranoia, too, has lingered. The constant revelations of secrets past, of illegal surveillance, of government lies, of programs like MKUltra have left a permanent residue of cynicism. Political scientists and sociologists continue to analyze the long-term effects of this pervasive secrecy on public trust in institutions. Did the constant unveiling of past deceptions create a permanent reflexive distrust of authority that makes governance and social cohesion more difficult in the 21st century? The assumption that someone somewhere is listening, that information is being manipulated, is no longer the sole province of spies and counter-spies. It has become a permanent feature of the background noise of modern life. Even our entertainment is a product of this secret war. For a quirky or off-topic fact, the entire genre of the modern spy thriller, from the glamour of James Bond to the grim realism of John le Carré, was a direct cultural response to the anxieties of the Cold War. It was how the public processed the terrifying reality of a world run by secrets. We took the very real threat of nuclear annihilation of moles and assassins and turned it into popular entertainment, a story with a hero and a clear resolution, something the real secret war so rarely had. So you see, the secrets are not gone. They are all around you. They are in the technology you use, the news you question, the stories you consume. The great struggle between two monolithic ideologies has splintered into 1,000 smaller, more complex, and often digital conflicts. The Cold War never truly ended. It just went freelance. It became software. It became data. The methodologies of the secret war, the disinformation, the surveillance, the psychological manipulation, have become a permanent part of our global operating system. The great secret, perhaps, is that the shadow war was so successful, it simply became the world. And so our long journey through the quiet, hidden corridors of the Cold War comes to a gentle close. We have drifted tonight through a world of whispers and shadows from the rubble of a broken Europe, where the first frantic search for secrets began to the silent, lonely vigil on a bridge of spies. We've soared to the edge of space in an untouchable silver plane and descended to the crushing blackness of the ocean floor to steal a submarine. We have sat in the quiet rooms of the codebreakers, the tense bunkers of the missile commanders, and the surreal, paranoid offices of the men who tried to weaponize the mind itself. But that world with its stark, brutal certainties is gone now. The great lumbering empires that fueled this secret war have faded into memory. The tensions have eased, the doomsday machines are dormant, and the men in the long trench coats have, for the most part, gone home. The ghosts have become stories, and the secrets have become history. The frantic energy of that long twilight struggle has given way to the quiet of this room right now. The only signals that matter anymore are the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the soft approaching whispers of sleep. The world of secrets can wait until morning. Let the file be closed, let the shadows recede, and let your mind drift into a well-deserved and peaceful rest. Good night.